Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff, and I'll be your host for the show. If you've had a Dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. For tonight's show, I decided to do a best of episode. Instead of doing a best of from multiple eyewitnesses, I'm going to do a best of from one eyewitness, Josh Turner. If you haven't heard Josh come on and share stories before, you're in for a real treat. Before I bring Josh on, I want to give you one quick reminder. If you'd like to buy your own Dogman Encounters t-shirt or other memorabilia, please go to dogmanencounters.com/store. As always, thanks for listening.
Jerry has two uncles. Well, he had four. One was his Uncle Adam, who died. Now, he died back in November, and that's a shame because I didn't get to interview him. Guy was 80 years old, going on 81, was still working on his farm, his ranch, and died working on a tractor. So, some of these country people, they work till the day they die. And I've seen that before with my own family, my family on my dad's side that lives out in the country, just working until they die. They tend to live longer, healthier lives because they grow what they eat. They eat what they grow. They just have a better diet. They live better. And they don't tend to retire. They just kind of work until that's it. But anyway, I missed my opportunity with him. And that's a shame because I'm sure he was the oldest brother of these brothers that I'm going to talk about now, which would be Jerry's uncles. And I missed that. And of course, Jerry's dad, Andrew, he was not willing to discuss his encounters. He didn't want to even talk about it. And according to what Noah and Abel, which are the guys I'm going to tell you about, they both seem to kind of agree that their dad, who was one of the original people out there that worked for the Hitchens, that their younger brother, Andrew, was the most like their dad. The dad never wanted to talk about it. He dealt with these things over and over again and never talked about it, never discussed it ever till the day he died. And it was just one of those things where they got the information that they got from his brother who died. And I guess his name was Lupe. Lupe, he had passed away a long, long time ago. So some of the stories from that previous generation were passed down by him and Art Hitchens, these stories that they had told that I'm about to tell you. But anyway, so what happened was I finally got a chance to interview Noah. Now, I got a hold of him first, and he is, I guess, Jerry's uncle, his dad's older brother. Now, like I said before, Adam, who was the oldest, his dad was named Adam too, so I don't want to confuse you. He's a junior of Adam Sr., and he's the one that died, and then his younger brother right below him was Abel, and then the next one down was Noah, and then Andrew, and then the youngest of all of them was Joseph. And Noah calls him the mistake. He said he wasn't supposed to be born. That's why he's so much younger than they were, because he goes, I didn't think my mother could still have children. And then out comes this kid, it's like, he was just like, but he was definitely, and the way JoJo had told me, it was kind of like he grew up as an only child, really, because all his brothers were older, they were way older. And so Joseph kind of like, he's the one closest to his nephews because he's closer in age to them. So Jerry and them, he's only about 10 years older than they are. So there's a little closer, whatever. But yeah, I think Abel was already like 20 years old when this kid was born or something. So JoJo, he kind of was like the black sheep, definitely. And I'll tell you a little more about him later on. Anyway, I started talking to Noah, and I'm going to give you some backstory here, okay? This guy, he's a vet. And when I first called this guy, it was like, who are you? Why are you calling me? Are you with the military? Are you with the government? And he started just asking me all these questions. And I thought that Jerry had told this guy. He was like, yeah, go ahead and call him. It's all good. It's cool. Well, it wasn't cool because at first this guy was like, I don't know you. I don't want to talk to you. And he hung up on me. And so I was going like, what the heck? So I called Jerry back and I said, this guy doesn't want to talk to me, man. And he goes, no. He's cool, man. So I guess he went over to his place later that afternoon, and I called and I talked to him, and then he knew that I wasn't part of some government, that apparently they'd been out there. So that's another thing. But I had to put his mind at ease, and his next question was, what interest do you have in these things? Why do you want to know about these wolves? Because he calls them wolves. He don't call them dog man or anything like that. He says wolves. I said, well, my interest in them is because I have had an encounter myself personally. And he's like, so? You know, it's very like, he's like, I've had three encounters with these things. He's like, so what? And I'm like, well, I want to know about it. And he goes, what are you writing a book? I said, no, I'm not writing a book. I just want to know this information really for myself. And then I'm willing to share it with your audience and with you. But my own personal curiosity, I think any researcher will tell you that a lot of it's just for their own personal curiosity. You know, like my friend who's a Bigfoot researcher down in Tomball, his name's Armando. He's a good friend of mine, and he's a Bigfoot researcher, and he goes out into the thicket all the time, and he searches. And I've talked to him extensively, and I'm like, why do you do it? Because I don't want to search out there. You know what I mean? I don't want to go out there. And he says, dude, you know, he's like, Wolf, it's for me personally. I just want to know. I just want the truth. And that's what I did. I just want to know. I want to know what these things are. I just want to know. It's just like curiosity. I've met a lot of people like him over the years. I have an uncle who likes to drink and do stuff, you know, whatever. And this guy's like that. He's a drinker. About the hour and a half mark, he was already starting to get pretty sloshed. And I was like trying to get information. At that point, it was like, well, okay. And the last half hour was just a lot of him talking about building cars and being in war and stuff. And so I was just like, okay, all right. And I could tell that this guy he's a pretty crazy guy. And his personality definitely is a contrast to Abel because they are two different people. And it's interesting because they have two different schools of thought on these dogmen. Noah, very matter of factly, he just thinks that they're like vermin or a nuisance that need to be killed. He goes, they're like coyotes or whatever. That's how he sees them. They're just pests. And if he sees one, he's, I'm going to kill it. And I was like, well, I hope you got a big gun. He goes, well, I got lots of guns. And, you know, him being a vet, yeah, he definitely does. And he actually was outside at one point and fired off a couple rounds while I was on the phone with him. And it was like, wow, dude, really? So it was an interesting experience just talking to this cat. You know, it was just very interesting experience. And he basically had told me that if he sees one, it's going to be dead. He's not playing around with them. He's never entertained any kind of friendliness toward them, which is something that Abel did apparently. But he's like, I walk around my property, armor-piercing bullets, incendiary rounds, and he goes, I'm not afraid of them. He goes, they can be killed. We know that. So anyway, getting him to stay focused too was also kind of a task. I don't know. Finally got the information I needed from him, and I got probably twice as much information out of his brother in about half the time. Let's put it that way. But with Noah, I had to like kind of keep steering him back. So what happened was, and that gives you a little backstory into that guy. And that, like I said, is Jerry's uncle, the character. So anyway, I got this guy to tell me about the beginning. And he said, well, the beginning being like when I was born. And I'm like, well, is that the beginning? And he goes, it was for me. I'm like, no. I mean, like the beginning. Your dad was on the property. What happened? I had heard that there were some real stories there. And he says, well, I can't tell you because I wasn't there. All I can tell you is what I was told and what I grew up knowing. And I said, do you believe it's true? He said, absolutely. He's like, that's what happened. So this is what he told me. He told me that it all started back in 1933. That's the exact year he gave me. But then again, this guy, who knows? He said it was during the Depression, and it was in 1933. Okay? That's what he said. I don't know if that's the truth or what, but he said that in the early 30s, this is what I was able to figure out, that at some point in the early 30s, they found a hole. Now, the whole spread was owned by Amos Hitchens, which would be Shane's great-grandfather. His grandfather's name is Art, and his dad's name is Art Jr. So anyways, there was this huge spread out there, and they had cattle. It was a ranch, and they had pigs, and they had chickens, and they had everything that a ranch has, whatever. But they had gotten really big, so they had about 14 vaqueros that worked for them. 10 of them were from Mexico. and 4 of them were Americans. 4 of them were huelios, as we would say, white people. And the other 10 were Mexicanos, or Mexicans. And he said back then, I guess there had been like some sort of war or something down in Mexico. And a lot of these Mexicans, there was an influx of people trying to get jobs. And it was hard for them to compete back then because the Depression, I mean, everybody needed a job. But he said that these guys, they hired them because they were good with their iron, their pistol, their cuerta, which is a gun. And so basically he said that that was a prerequisite on that ranch, that they had to be able to handle themselves with a pistol. And I said, well, was it because of the thieving? And he's like, no, it's because of those wolves, fool. I'm like, well, it happens. There's cattle thieves too, and he goes, no, that wasn't the problem. It was those wolves that you want to know about. And I was like, okay. And so he tells me that they found a hole near a creek, near a dried creek bed. And it was this huge hole. And he said that it was big enough for people to go inside of it. And he said that after a couple of days that the vaqueros, a couple of them got the sand to go down in it. So they went down in this tunnel and never came back. And he said that it scared the pants off of the other guys that were still there, working, whatever. And they went back to the main ranch and they told Amos that some of the guys had gone missing. Now he tells me that there were 3, but then Abel later told me there was only 2. I don't know. The number doesn't really matter. Let's say 2 or 3 had gone missing in this tunnel. So the old man that ran the ranch, that owned it at that time, he told them to bury it, to cover it over. Now, I don't know what kind of equipment they use. This is in the 30s. I'm doubting that they had any kind of real excavation equipment. So I guess they just took a bunch of guys and shoveled dirt into it and covered it up. But he said that they buried it pretty heavily. And so I guess that was considered like an act of like war, I guess, to these things. So this is what really started it. This is what set it off. This is what started the whole problem, according to Noah. That was the jumping off point to him, the beginning. Now, I'm sure there were problems before, but I guess these older guys that I was talking to, I guess they don't know about those problems. All they know is that that was what they were told, that that's how it started. Well, the next night after it was buried, the bunkhouse that sat on the southwest corner of the property got attacked. And the first night they said it was just rocks. Now he told me that where that bunkhouse used to be, there's still some pieces of it, that these rocks, he said that as a grown man, if you pick one of them up, you might be able to throw them a couple feet with both arms over your head. But he said that they were flinging them at the bunkhouse and they were knocking big holes in the wall and everything. And so the next night, I guess this went on throughout the night. The next day, they were trying to fix it, whatever. Well, it didn't matter because they got attacked again the second night. And that's when supposedly a big shootout took place. And a couple of the guys shot themselves, like shot each other. And back then, there was no electricity in Texas until like 1951. So they used lanterns, kerosene lanterns. And so the bunkhouse caught fire and it burned down. And one of these guys got drugged out into the woods, and that was it. They never found the guy. We don't know what happened to the guy. These were guys from Mexico. Like I said, it was during the Depression. Who knows? Well, all the guys left. All but like 4 of the dudes left. There were 2 guys from Mexico that stayed and 2 of the white guys that stayed. The rest all either left to go back to Mexico or they left where they came from. Well, one of the guys that left absconded with, or eloped, I guess I should say, with Gladys, who happened to be, I guess, their dad's sister. So they left. Now, during the Depression, it's hard to find a job. You get a job. Something really bad had to really happen for you to leave, to just quit that job. You had room and board and pay. So, yeah, something terrible had to have happened. So all but 4 guys had left, and then they rebuilt another bunkhouse closer to the main house, and they hired some more guys. And so that was the beginning. And so what Noah said was they started having problems big time after that initial battle that took place. I guess you want to call it a battle. They started taking the cattle, like not one here and there. No, it was like bad. He said that, now he says it was in 2 months. Abel said it was 3 months. And like I said, there's these little differences between the numbers or whatever, but within a 2 or 3 month span, 400 head of cattle were killed. I don't even know how to wrap my mind around. That's a lot. I mean, he said that they had about 400 cows out there, steer, whatever, and that they were obliterated, and that this went on, and they killed all the chickens, they killed all the hogs. It was just ridiculous what these things are capable of doing if they're mad. They're like an angry hive of bees. And so it all culminated with, and I think I talked about her in the last time I was on. Her name was Myrtle. She was a little kid back then. But one of these things, and according to Noah, it was a small one. Now, I don't know why he knows that or how he knows that. I didn't ask that. But he said that he goes, one of the smaller ones, there was a giant tree that was outside of the window that Myrtle slept in, and it crawled up that tree, and it yanked her out the window. And he said that it was dragging her across the yard, and that these vaqueros that were out there closing up, they saw it, heard it, whatever, came running and started shooting. And luckily they didn't hit her, and the grandfather was freaking out. But once it dropped her, they all opened up on it, and it fled. It got away. And according to what Art Jr., who I guess Noah knows very well, told him that the woods, well, he was a little boy, a little bitty kid or whatever, and he said that he saw the woods full of eyes. That's a creepy story. And he said that who knows what would have happened. So that traumatized her for years. I mean, I guess that was one of the things that made her never go out at night and whatever. This went on. They were desperate. They tried bringing in some hunters, a guy that claimed that he had bagged the big five in Africa. And I've been to Africa. I've been there, and I've seen a few of these species. And let me tell you, dude, they're pretty awesome creatures. But I don't see them stacking up to one of these things. And so when they went into the woods, long story short, they came back after seeing what they were up against, told them no thank you, you're on your own, and left. That was the end of that. So that didn't work out. Him and his guys, there's no way I'm going to hunt these things. So they took off. Apparently they saw them. So what they ended up doing was they burned down the woods around it. They had no other choice. It was either that or, I guess, basically just throw in the towel and they all leave. So Amos's wife said, if we don't leave, I'm going to leave you. She was going to take the kids and take off. So I guess this was a last-ditch effort to try to save what was left, or at least remove them from the property, because at this point, the only people that were there out of loyalty. One of them was Adam Sr., which was Noah's dad. And so they burned the woods. And now he said that his dad talked about that part, that they had to burn the woods to get rid of these things. And they moved the tree line back a long ways. And he said that after a couple days, they came back after this fire that they had started had petered out. When they came back, he said it was like another planet. All the woods were singed to ash, and they just had an empty bunch of buildings with nothing. It was like nothing. And so Amos decided then and there that he was going to sell it. And I asked him what his dad had ever told him. He said there wasn't anything else his dad had really ever told him. He goes, most of the information I got was from his brother, Lupe. And he said that his brother was one of the two vaqueros that stayed. But I guess it paid off because they ended up buying that property for like next to nothing. And during all this, they had a sister, and she eloped with one of the cowboys after the whole thing with the girl being drug out. That was it for them. He stuck it out longer than most, but he, I guess, was from like Montana, somewhere near Butte or something. And so he took off with Gladys, which was Adam's younger sister. She worked kind of as a housekeeper. She lived inside the main house with the kids and stuff. She left, and they never heard from her again. And when Adam Jr., Noah's older brother, died just back in November, they tried to locate anything about her because her name was on one of the deeds, I guess. She was part of it, she was the last of that generation or whatever. And I was thinking, wow, there's no way she's still alive, but they were thinking maybe she had a descendant or something. I don't know the whole story about how that works. So anyway, nobody ever heard from her again, and don't blame her. She probably never wanted to set foot on that place again. So the land was partitioned off, I guess, 2 different tracts. And then there was another piece to the other side that Amos auctioned off or whatever. And so they ended up with just this middle strip now. And so they got neighbors that live further north, and then they got neighbors that live further south, to the west, southwest. And that's Adam and his sons, which are Noah and Abel. And so Noah told me that by the time he was born, the big house, their ancestral home that Abel now occupies, it had been there for several years. But when they were building it, according to what his mother told him and his uncle, when they were building it, these things continued to harass the family, and that they had to hire 3 different crews. And that one of the guys from the first crew, which were, I guess, essentially like friends or something, actually, he got drug out of his tent. They had like a tent that they were sleeping in or whatever, I guess, early on in the construction of this thing. And he got drug out of his tent and bit and got his thigh tore up real bad, and he almost died. So he would get a group of guys to help, and then they would leave, and then he'd try to get another group of guys. And so it ended up costing more to build the house than it did to buy the property, if you can believe that. That's crazy. So these things were determined to not allow them to come back and take root, but they did. Humans are stubborn. So they rebuilt, and he started out with some sheep, and then he bought cattle, and then he just worked his way back up, and he rebuilt the farm. And Amos, his son, they didn't come back for a while. But then eventually Art Sr., he took over. He came back and started ranching again, and he started rebuilding. But all the time, they would lose cattle, and they would find these weird, what they call markers, like deer heads up in trees. And sometimes they would have a steer that would get slaughtered, and they would stab the head onto one of the fence posts. I don't know if it was like a marker or a warning. I don't know what that was or what that is. That's weird. But anyway, I got into Noah's encounter. He said he encountered him 3 times. And when you think about it, him being in his 70s, that's not a lot for a 70-year life out there. That's not a whole lot. So it's not like they're just walking outside and they're just right there ready to pounce. They're there on the property. And he said that one time when he was a little boy, he said he was 8. I think he said he was 8 or 9. I can't remember which. But he said that he was playing down by this creek. And he said that that creek that they would play at would sometimes have water, sometimes it wouldn't. And that there was a big mound right there by the creek. And he, in his estimation, he thinks that that's where the hole was, that that's where they covered it up. But he was told never to go down there. And him and his older brothers were down there playing in that creek. And these 3 dogmen, which he doesn't call them dogmen, these 3 wolves, walked out of the woods. And he said that they walked out of the woods and they were off to their left of them. But he said that they never took their eyes off of them. And all the boys, it was them and some neighbor boys from the neighboring property. They all just stopped playing and just stared at these things. And these things stared at them. And he said that they all got down on all 4s and began to lap water from the creek. And they all just kind of stared at him the whole time. And he said that the funny thing was, he's like, I heard this popping noise. And he said that was the first time he'd ever heard that noise or whatever. But he said that when they get down on all 4s, he said they make a popping noise. Now, Abel added to that later when I talked to him. He said that when they move up and down, they make this popping noise. And I asked Noah to describe it. And he says if you take like a plastic soda bottle, you pop the cap off. He's like, that's almost how it sounds, but like in quick succession. Pop, pop, pop. That's the image I got in my mind. And he said he heard it. And he was like, what is that? Like, that is, was so weird, and he's like, I knew these things existed. I had heard lots of stories about it, and we knew we weren't supposed to be over there in that part of the property, but the creek was so inviting. It was summertime, or he said it was late spring, actually. He didn't say summer, but he said that it was inviting. And he said, and in the summertime, it's very inviting, and if it's hot. So when they walked back into the woods, he said that all the boys ran back to the house. And he said that when he got back to the house, his dad gave them a whooping. He basically whipped them pretty good. And he really got on to Adam because he's the oldest and he was supposed to be watching the younger ones and should have known better than to take them down there. His dad told him, don't ever go down to that part of the property because these wolves live over there. And he's like, you're lucky to be alive. And he began to get the impression that it wasn't a big deal. Like, what is the big deal? These things aren't hurting us or anything. But his dad had a healthy fear and respect and hatred for these things. He hated them. He didn't like them at all. And so he told them, he goes, these things are bad news. They're really bad. Don't mess with them. Don't let them see you even. If you see one, hide. So that's Noah's story. That's what he told me. It was just contrasting his story to Abel's story. And I'm going to get into Abel's story. What he told me about Abel's story was pretty crazy. He said that you can talk to my brother and you can get more information from him than what I can tell you because he actually caught one of these things. So he kind of left me with that. And like I said, his other two encounters, I'll get into those a little bit later. I'll go back to it, but he left me hanging with that. And so we talked a little more, but it wasn't anything about Dogman. It was about building hot rods and going to a brothel in Austin in the 60s. It was crazy. A bunch of crazy nonsense. So I ended up going, yeah, okay, and it was very polite, and we talked, and we got off the phone. A couple days later, I get in touch with Abel. It was a Sunday. He just got out of church. He's a deacon at his church. He's a real religious guy. He doesn't drink or do any of those things. I guess he used to at one point. He was drinking at one point and smoking cigars every day, and his house caught fire. So I'll tell you about that. But anyways, talk to Abel. And of course I wanted to know everything I could about this dog man that he supposedly caught. Well, he started from the beginning too, and he basically just reiterated everything that Noah had told me going back to the beginning with the hole that they covered up, and he talked, and of course the numbers were a little different, it wasn't exact and identical, but it was basically the same thing. I got the gist of the same story. But when I got to the part about his encounters, he goes, dude, I've encountered these things over and over again. And then he said every day for several months I encountered one. And I'm like, how is that? And he says, because I caught one. Now that's what I wanted to know. And so I told him, I said, can you tell me about this? And he says, yeah, oh, yeah. He said, you can talk to my brother and you can get more information from him than what I can tell you because he actually caught one of these things. So he kind of left me with that. And like I said, his other two encounters, I'll get into those a little bit later. I'll go back to it, but he left me hanging with that. And so we talked a little more, but it wasn't anything about Dogman. It was about building hot rods and going to a brothel in Austin in the 60s. It was crazy. A bunch of crazy nonsense. So I ended up going, yeah, okay, and it was very polite, and we talked, and we got off the phone. A couple days later, I get in touch with Abel. It was a Sunday. He just got out of church. He's a deacon at his church. He's a real religious guy. He doesn't drink or do any of those things. I guess he used to at one point. He was drinking at one point and smoking cigars every day, and his house caught fire. So I'll tell you about that. But anyways, talk to Abel. And of course I wanted to know everything I could about this dog man that he supposedly caught. Well, he started from the beginning too, and he basically just reiterated everything that Noah had told me going back to the beginning with the hole that they covered up, and he talked, and of course the numbers were a little different, it wasn't exact and identical, but it was basically the same thing. I got the gist of the same story. But when I got to the part about his encounters, he goes, dude, I've encountered these things over and over again. And then he said every day for several months I encountered one. And I'm like, how is that? And he says, because I caught one. Now that's what I wanted to know. And so I told him, I said, can you tell me about this? And he says, yeah, oh, yeah. He said that back in the late 60s. Now, I'm not for sure because these guys are, they're getting up there in years. And I think that Abel's like 77 or something like that. I can't remember exactly what he said, 74, 77. He's old. So he said that he was out on the property. Now, according to Noah, when he was away in Vietnam, this is when it happened, when he was gone. So he remembers seeing one of these things like that looked like that, but he wasn't there when this thing was caught. Now, apparently, Jerry, the guy that I originally met from the last interview, whatever I was telling you about, his dad, Andrew, he remembers this, supposedly, but he didn't really talk about it. But Abel and one of his guys that worked for him, because at that point he was kind of like the foreman of the ranch. He kind of had taken over. So he was checking the property, and he went down near that creek, and he said right there near that creek that we played at as a kid, it was dry at that time. He said he went down there and he found a dead one, a female. Now I asked him about that, and I said, well, it was a female. And he says, it was definitely a female. And I said, how do you know? And he says, because it had teats. I was like, so what did they look like? What did it look like? He said that it had like what looked like female breasts on top with little like dog looking like how dogs would have, and they just went all the way down. And that's really weird. Like he said that it looked almost like a cross between human and dog. And so he said that the teeth went all the way down its body. And so I was blown away by that, you know. But then he tells me that they heard a whining noise, like a puppy, whimpering, whining, and then almost like a moan. And so they went into the woods. He said not far into the woods, but on the other side of the creek bed. They go into the woods, they follow the sound, and they see this little guy. And his exact words, he said there was this little guy up there in the tree. And he said that on my horse, I could almost touch his foot, but it was like squishing itself into a ball. And he said that it almost fell. And so he thought, well, maybe I could pull it down. He said it was real small. He said it was smaller than a domestic dog. He said that they got the idea to lasso it. And he said that they were afraid that it might hurt it when it hit the ground. But he said, no, they're pretty resilient. That it fell, it just kind of popped back up, and then it kind of tried to run around the tree, and it got wrapped around the tree. And then eventually he said that they subdued it, and it bit one of them pretty bad on his arm. And he said the thing had real sharp teeth, like razor sharp teeth. And he said that these things have teeth sharper than any dog you could imagine. He's like, it's unreal. So he said that they got it under control. He said they managed to tie its arms, but he goes, the horse was rearing and kicking, wasn't nothing to do with it. So they got this burro, and he said that they tied him behind her, and they just had him follow along, and that it had a really hard time walking on just two legs. He said that it kept wanting to get down on all fours. And he said that this thing had big oversized paw feet, as he said. He said he looked almost like a rabbit. The feet were too big, their back feet. And he said that they kind of grow into their feet. That's what he said. They have these really big oversized paws. So anyway, he said that they got it back to the house and that it was terrified. They stuck it in one of the barns, and that it just went and sat in the corner and whimpered all night. And it wouldn't eat. He tried to feed it. It wouldn't eat. And he said that eventually his wife got the idea to soak bread in milk and give it to it. Then it ate. It ate the milk bread, and then it drank milk too. And he said that after they got it to eat, he said that it started eating all the time. He said it was ravenous. This thing ate constantly. He said it was always hungry. And he said that he would feed it kibble. And eventually it got to where it would eat out of his hand. He said, I hand fed this thing. Now, this is what he told me. Okay. He said that they started feeding it slabs of beef. And he said that it ate everything. It would eat the offal. It would eat everything. You know, it didn't matter what part of the meat. It just, you could give it anything. It would eat it. He said it would chew bones. And he said the jaws were really strong, that they could snap through bone easy. And he said that this thing started growing. But one of the things he told me, though, he said he got worried because it had started to lose its hair. Another thing was that when he first brought it home, his dad tried to kill it. His dad grabbed a pitchfork and tried to impale it when he was just a little thing. He had to literally save its life. And he said that his dad almost killed him, almost stabbed him with it. He was so adamant about getting rid of it. Eventually, it started to lose its hair, and he said that it grew back some as it got older and got more, my words, habituated is what I think. As it got more habituated, it began to get its hair back. He said, but its hair was still in patches, which is, I don't know what that is, stress or something. I don't know. And he said that they gave it a name. They called it Stripes. And I asked him about that, and he said that it had gray fur underneath its ears that came down into like a V on its chest. That's weird. He said that it was a very unique pattern, like, you know, that he hadn't seen any others like that. And I asked him how many others had he seen, and he said that he had seen several because he would go deep into the woods and he would see them. He said that they would sometimes parallel him in the woods, and I was like, weren't you afraid? And he's like, no, I never had a real fear of them because they never attacked us. They never attacked me. And he said that that stemmed from the fact that he had heard all these stories, but he said it killed the livestock and whatever, but it never really managed to kill many people. Now, it did kill some people. People died. like those guys that disappeared and then the guy that got dragged into the woods. But he said that, he believed that if they really wanted to, they would have just killed everybody. And they didn't. So I guess his idea was that they do have some sense of, hey, this is not a good idea. So he says that they do hurt people. Now, Noah basically had told me what he thinks is that Abel's got this idealized version of him in his head, is his exact words, where he's delusional. But when I talked to Abel told me that that's not the case. He's like, Noah may think that I think that they're all good and everything. He's like, but they're not. I know they're not all good. He's like, there's a lot of them that are really bad. He's like, but it's like people. There's good ones and there's bad ones. So I guess Noah looks at them as animals and Abel kind of looks at them as people, or gives them more of a persona, And he said that Stripes grew to be a little bigger than a man by the time they let him go, or that he forced him to go. He said he literally had to carry him into the woods and try to make him, but that he kept hanging around near the property, and his dad hated him. He didn't like him. He didn't want anything to do with any of them. He thought that they were all bad, all completely evil. There was nothing good about them. That he said that one day that thing's going to kill you and eat you. And he said that obviously it didn't, because I'm still here. And he said that periodically him and his wife would go to the edge of the woods and they would leave food for it. He didn't elaborate on what the food was, but he did say that sometimes his wife would bake stuff and take it out there. I don't know. It's weird. I mean, I guess he had a relationship with this thing. This thing became like family to him because he referred to it as his boy. He says he was my boy, and he goes, and I loved him and he loved me. We were friends. One time he said that he was walking through this trail where there was this barn that was kind of the halfway point where they would keep hay. And that's all it was, just a storage barn for hay. That's all it was. And he said that, it started to rain. So he had ducked into this little corner of the barn, whatever, to get out of the rain. And he said he had this little transistor radio in his pocket, a little radio. He turned it on and he heard this crackling, popping noise and he thought it was coming from the radio. And then he realized that he knew what that was. It was one of these things. So he clicked the radio off and he heard it like something moving in the hay. And then he heard a growling noise and he turns and he looks and he sees this dark brown female. And he said that he knows it was a female. He could tell at this point, he had been around him enough. And he was like, oh no, I'm in trouble now. Because the only one, I guess, that he was really friendly with was Stripes. That was it. The other ones, he didn't know anything about them, and he said that I didn't know anything about these other ones. And he said that he heard whimpering, like he had woke up, when puppies wake up or something, and he heard this whimpering, crying, and he heard like several puppies crying. And he said, oh no, there's a female in here with puppies. I'm in big trouble. And he said that just then he heard something else come around the back of the barn or whatever. He said that it sounded like heavy, heavy footsteps, and he thought there must be a large male with this thing. And he said she was like staring at him, growling, but she wasn't in like pounce mode yet. And then he said that when that thing came out of the back of the barn, it was still daylight. He goes, but you couldn't see clearly. He's like, but sure enough, I saw the pattern of my boy. I saw his chest and I knew it was him. And he thought, oh my God, I'm saved. So he said that he came up to where he was at, got in between him and the female, got her to back off. And I didn't ask to go into details about how that went down. He just said that it basically got in between him and this other female that was angry. And he said that there was a small one kind of trawling behind it, like hanging on his leg. And he said that it looked like a little miniature version of him. And he said that I knew at that point that they had babies. And he just kind of slowly backed away and got out of there, and he said that he walked as slow and as careful as you can. He said the only thing you can do when you're cornered by these things is just to back away. It's like there's nothing else you can do, And so he said that after that initial contact with the female, he said that eventually she became kind of acclimated to him too, that every now and then he would see the pups around as they grew. And he said that, they look just like wolves, but they can stand up, that's what he said, but they have human looking shoulders. And I asked him what he thought they were, because Noah thinks they're just wolves. They're just wolves that mimic people, as he says. They learned how to walk or whatever. He says monkeys can mimic people, and I say, yeah, but wolves aren't primates. But Abel said that he thinks that they're just like people. He says they're just like another tribe of people. And that's what he calls them. He calls them a tribe. He doesn't call them a pack. Like me, if I refer to wolves, I refer to them as a pack. he's calling these things a tribe, which is giving them more human characteristics, like saying that they're like Native American tribes or something. And one of the things that he told me, like he said, this thing grew fast. Like when he had it, he said that it grew really, really quickly. And I thought it was interesting, that this thing, he fed it dog food for a long time, but it would also eat people food. And that he said that these things would eat berries. He gave it all kinds of different stuff. He said that it would eat anything. It was pretty much an omnivore, according to him. Now, I don't know if they're like that in the wild, but I know that the one that he had, that he, I guess for lack of a better term, domesticated, did eat different types of food. He said that he would give them all kinds of stuff, and sometimes it would eat vegetables. And I didn't ask him to elaborate on what kind of vegetables it ate, but he said that it would eat fruit, it would eat vegetables, it ate all kinds of meat, and he said that it would eat dog food. Whatever you gave it, it would eat it. He said that sometimes it would be kind of leery of a new food, but that if it watched him eat it, then it would eat it too. And that's funny because my own dogs do that. I thought about that. Like if my dogs see me eating celery or something that they never eat, they'll want some. And then they'll put it in their mouth and they might chew it. And I've gotten them to eat grapes. So I'm thinking, I don't know if that's the canine side. I don't know what that is. It's just weird. It's a weird phenomenon. And so anyway, over the years, I guess he thinks that eventually this thing went back to its original tribe, and he thinks that it took over. It took control. He goes, because until Stripes got big and had pups, I guess, with this female apparently, that there was still predation happening to the cattle. And sometimes one of their dogs, because he said that they have really big, strong Spanish Mastins with spiked collars they use to patrol the property. And according to him, he said these things, they would get with those dogmen. He didn't call them dog, we call them wolves, but he said that 4 of those things could get on one of those dogmen. He said because those big old collars kept their necks, and these dogs, I used to have a Mastiff. I had an English Mastiff, not a Spanish one, but I know what he's talking about. They're huge. Mine was 130 pounds. It was like a really friendly pit bull, but once you keyed it up or sicked it on somebody, that was it. I mean, they're toast. Those things are tough. I mean, I know the Romans used them to hunt lions, but he was telling me, he goes, I had some pretty tough dogs. He said every now and then I'd lose one, and they would go out into the woods and they would chase something and then they wouldn't come back. He said, but he said that they were pretty good at fighting these things or keeping them away from the house, doing their job, basically defending the property. He said that he had one named Maggie, and that it became really close to this dog man that he had acclimated to people, and that he was really close to her, and she treated him almost like a mama. And when he had gotten her to be cool with him, it kind of followed her around, and that was like his mother, which I thought was interesting, that he had this dog that was like his pal. And then she had a litter, and one of the pups in that litter, who turned out to be the runt, actually became Stripe's buddy. And when he finally kicked him out, whatever, that dog ran off and went to go hang out with him in the woods. And so he said that, I don't know whatever became of him, but he basically took off and was his friend. Pretty interesting. Just listening to this guy talk about this gave me a better understanding of the dynamics of these things. And I'm not saying that it's like that everywhere you go, but that tells me a little bit about these things, like they're not just mindless killing machine beasts, like I guess at one point I should say, not we, but I guess I thought at one point that they're just a bunch of killers roaming around the woods that could just kill you on sight. And I guess I had that thought because I was afraid of them. So anyways, what ended up happening, he said that he hadn't seen Stripes in a long, long time. I asked him about that. When was the last time he had seen him? And he said that one day he was out in the woods and he heard all this fighting, snapping, and he ran back to the house because it scared him. And he said it took a lot for him to be afraid, but he knew something had happened. He said that he thinks that that was the point where Stripes went back and took over. Now, when you piece it together, and he didn't tell me this, but this is what I think. I think that one that he domesticated, I think that his dad might have been the alpha or something, and I think he got deposed. And I think that the mother was probably trying to protect him or save him, and maybe he had siblings that got wiped out too, because lions do that. The new male comes in and it'll kill the cubs and try to mate with the female. If the females resist, then they'll kill the female. And so when Abel, and I should probably tell you this part, I think I forgot it, when Abel found that female, he said that it looked like it had been chewed up. It was dead. It was killed, I should say. Not just like it died of natural causes. He said that it had been chewed up. So I'm thinking the other members of the pack tore her up, probably trying to protect her cubs. She wasn't willing to breed. I don't know. I don't know how that works. I don't know enough about these things to give you a good answer to that. But this is what Abel was kind of telling me. And that's what I was able to glean from his story, that that's what happened. And that's what I believe, too, that this is probably the case. That was why he was hiding in the tree or whatever, And so, according to what Abel told me, he went back and assumed control of the tribe because he said that Stripes was a big boy and that he was well over 8 feet. The one that I saw was 7 foot 5 inches. And I know that because we measured from the floor to the window. But according to him, this thing was over 8 feet tall. There's some of the questions I asked him, and he told me that it was huge. He said that it was a good foot taller, at least, over the female that it ran around with. And he said that the pups grew and that some of them looked like the dad. And that he said that sometimes he would see one and think, oh, that's Stripes. No, that's not. That's one of his kiddos. And they were okay with him too, because they would go out to that barn and they would leave food periodically, and he said that there was no problems, no aggression, nothing after that initial encounter from the female. He said that when they were real young, he kind of stayed away until they got a little older, a little bigger, so she wouldn't be as protective. And so that's the story about that. So what ended up happening, according to him, the last time he saw Stripes was well over 10 years ago, and that he looked really old. He saw him walking on this ridgeline. And he said that he had a couple of the other ones with him and that he looked like he was hobbling, like that was it for him, And he said that he doesn't know the whole dynamics or how it works either. He just knows that shortly after the last time he saw him, he said that the predation started back up, that they started losing dogs. And he said that here lately it's gotten really bad. I mean, they're having all kinds of problems. He said all of the cats are gone. He said he's lost most of his dogs and he's lost some cows. And he said that a couple of the cows were just killed outright. They weren't even eaten. They just got slaughtered. So he says that his brother and Shane's younger brother, who I actually know is a real dumb, that they had gone out there to try to bag one of these things. Now, this happened back in the fall. Now, I haven't talked to JoJo since like September. So I don't know what has transpired with this guy or whatever between the fall and now. But apparently they had gone out there and they shot one of these things. And he said this happened back in the fall. This is what Abel and Noah both told me. And that after they shot it, a bunch of stuff started happening. The thing about what JoJo did is that he doesn't live out there. So he goes out there and gets together with Cody, which is Shane's younger brother, who's really interested in killing one of these things. They want to kill it, put it on YouTube and show the world, hey, look, this is what is out here, which is so stupid. And those old timers don't want anything to do with the government or anybody coming out there to their property. And Noah was very adamant. He said, if somebody comes out to my property, I'm going to shoot them. I don't play around, And now Abel didn't say nothing like that. He just said that, they've had the government out there before. Some guys came out there from Fort Sam looking around and tried to come on the property and they made them leave. Now, he said that he knows that the sheriff's department, they've been out there too, because the guy that works for the sheriff's department, his grandfather knew his dad and he knew Shane's grandfather and everybody. So his dad was a cop. And so he says that they knew about these things going way back when all that stuff was happening back in the 30s. They would come to the property. Oh, nothing they could do. I mean, what are they going to do? They can't do nothing about these things. He said they know they exist, but he thinks that maybe some of the local law enforcement had tipped off somebody in the military, and that's why they came nosing around. I don't know what to think about that. That's a whole nother thing, but they're real worried about people messing around out there or whatever, coming out to their property. And I know that when Joseph and Cody shot one of these things, and Abel seems to think they killed it. He said, but they don't allow their dead to stay for very long. He says, if one of them's dead, he goes, and you get to go up and get a good look at it, it's going to be gone soon. You have a very short window for these things. And I've heard that with Sasquatch too, that supposedly, one of them dies. I had this lady that lives up in Oregon. She was telling me, she's like, one of them died and it was like in the back by this creek behind their house. And it was only there for a little while and then it was gone. Well, I'm pretty sure these things do the same thing. They grab their dead. Do they bury them? I have no idea. I don't know anything about that. That is just so much weirdness for me to even contemplate. I don't even know what they could possibly do with them. But I know that they don't allow people to take them. So he said that, this one that they shot, they used a 50 caliber, and so they can be killed. And Abel and Noah were very adamant about that, because I told them that people would shoot these things periodically and that nothing would happen to them. Like, they were impervious to bullets, and they both laughed, both of them, and I wasn't talking to them at the same time. I was talking to them separately. And Abel, he was like, that's bull. He goes, you can kill anything. If it bleeds, it dies. He goes, and these things are just creatures just like we are. He says God's creatures. That's his opinion. I understand that. But he says they're just God's creatures like we are. He goes, they bleed, they die, they get old, they get sick. And Noah, he claims that they know good and well what a gun is, because, and I'll get back to his other encounter. And one of the encounters he had, he was out in the woods hunting rabbits, and one of these things popped up behind a log, and he said he heard that popping noise. He heard that, noise, the way he made it with his, I can't do it, but he said that, he heard it, and he looked, and he sees one just growling, standing right there. And he said that he pointed his rifle at it, and it ducked down between some trees. And he said that these things are smart. They know exactly what that gun is capable of. He says, and I use incendiary rounds, he goes, because fire works best. So he said that he had actually popped one of them in the shoulder one time, he thinks by accident, but he didn't even get a good look at it. He just heard a yelp. They were playing around near an area where they go and they shoot, and he thinks one of them might have been sleeping close to the wood line, and that they just started firing into the woods, and he heard like a yelping noise. And he also claimed that he heard a wild boar. He thinks there's a big male boar out there that they killed that was near 700 pounds, Vic. Now, these things get huge, because I know in my hometown, somebody killed one, and get this, that was near Granger Lake, where I'm from, 900 pounds. 900 pounds. Now, I saw the pictures, and I know the guy that did it, so this really happened. This is no fairy tale. It was almost 9, it was 890 pounds. So these things get really big. He said they had a really big male boar out there, and he thinks that one of those younger ones got tore up by it, because he heard a growling, howling, whatever, and then he heard one of these hogs out there, and he said that they were just going to war, like they were fighting. And he said that he heard like a yap, 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 how dogs, when they get injured, and he thinks that this boar may have gored this thing to death, because he said that they would see that hog around periodically. It was a wild boar. Here in Texas, they're everywhere. Adam told him there's a dead one out there by the tree line. And he said that, yeah, I heard it getting into a fight with that big boar that we got on the property. So anyway, he said that this thing became a big problem. So they went out and they decided to kill it. And he said that this thing not only had killed that dog man, but it had also badly gored a couple of their dogs. And that this thing was just a mutant, So eventually he said that they bagged it. They killed it. 680 pounds. That's a big boy. And he said that it was mean, that his head was he said it looked prehistoric, this thing that they killed. He said, I'd never seen a hog look like that. It was just deformed looking. It was mean, It was funny because I told him, I said I'd heard stories of these hogs getting really big, and there was one that they called Hogzilla, He said, well, he's like, this thing looked like Godzilla. He's like, it was horrible, And he said that they knew that if this thing could get with one of those wolves, that it would make short work of a person. And so they were like, we got to do something. We had kids out here and stuff. And so they had to get rid of it, And so they went after it. But the thing about it that strikes me is just the level of intelligence that these things have. I had always heard, oh, they're smart, but it just blows my mind, like how smart they can really be. Like when I hear stories, people tell me about them turning doorknobs and unscrewing light bulbs and communicating. And when people are out in the woods and how they get followed by them and they feel like they're being flanked. And it's so scary to think of something that deadly and that intelligent. It's no wonder that our government and our military are trying to figure out what they are, if they don't already know. I'm sure they know they exist, but they're probably wanting to figure it out. Now I got friends that believe that they're government experiments themselves. I don't know, but I think that the fact that these things have been around for as long as they have, I think that kind of closes the book on that. Now, maybe they have gotten some of them, and that's why we have the different types. Now, I don't know a lot about the different types. I know that you have that theory about the different types or whatever, but I don't know. every time I think I found an answer to something, there's more questions that pop up. So yeah, in the fall, Joseph and Shane's stupid brother went out there and shot one of them. He said that now it's gotten really bad. He thinks that it's going to start a whole new level of violence. It's going to take place. Abel seems to think that there are two big ones that are in charge now. And he said that they're reddish brown in color, which makes sense because that's what Shane had told me. The one that attacked him was reddish brown. And he said that they're two big males. He thinks they're brothers. And that they may actually be descendants of the one that he caught because the mother was a reddish brown one. But he said that he doesn't know. He has no idea. And he said that big black one that Joseph killed, he said that was a huge mistake. And he said, I know why he did it because, the one that attacked him in the house, he said that thing, he thinks because they had shot at one of them before, he said that he thinks that thing stalked him out there to that property he was working on. And that's why it went into the house. He said it went into the house to kill him. That's what he said. He really believed that. And he said that Jojo going out there and shooting at the first one he saw was a big mistake because he said that the one that he thinks that the one that attacked him in the house when he was working on the cabinets, I don't know if you remember that story from episode 116, but he said that one had to have been a big male because it had to have been like 8-9 feet tall. He said it was huge. And he said there's a black one that's bigger than the two brothers that he thinks is either kind of like rogue. It's kind of on its own or whatever. Like he got cast out or something, or maybe it's subordinate to those two reddish brown ones. He doesn't know. He said, but he thinks it's a real young one that has just grown into its, whatever its prime. And, he said that the one that they went out there and shot back in the fall was a female. And he said that was a huge mistake doing that. And he said that he thinks that a whole new series of events is about to take place. Now, unfortunately, when Abel was talking to me, his interview that I gave him was sandwiched between two other calls and I was falling asleep. I was really tired and it was early for me because I had to be up all night the night before. And so when we were talking, I actually fell asleep at the end of the conversation. Unfortunately, I feel bad about it, but I didn't get to finish listening to his story he was telling me about one of his encounters with these things and he was giving me information. Very polite, articulate, educated guy, very friendly. And so he, like I said, was a real contrast to his brother Noah. He didn't give me a bunch of other stuff, that I had to sift through and pick out like vegetables in a garden. I just was able to talk to the guy and get to the point, and he told me everything that he had, and he was just talking and I told him, well, I'll call you tomorrow. And then he said, no, I'm packing tomorrow to go to Lubbock. My daughter's getting remarried, whatever. So I have not been able to get back with him. And I debated about maybe trying to finish interviewing him before I got in touch with you. But I was like, you know what? I want to get these stories out there while they're fresh. So there may be more from him anyway, because I didn't get all of the encounters or whatever. I know that there was one other story where Noah was walking along a tree line where there were dewberries. Now, they're called blackberries, but here in Texas, they grow wild, and we call them dewberries. So him and his wife were picking dewberries, and he heard some snapping noises in the woods, like some twigs snapping. So Noah said he pointed his rifle, and he heard whatever it was kind of jog away. That was his words. So that tells you the level of intelligence these things have, just to see a gun. And he didn't even see the thing. He just knew that it was there. Usually he says that the leveling of a rifle is enough to make them back off. He said, but the old timers claim that when they attack you, they'll attack you from behind. And this is what Noah said that was very intriguing. And I've wondered this, Vic, and I don't know the answer, but this is what I think is the deal. And I think that, that when he was telling me this, I think he's right. Okay. And I'll tell you what he said. He said that the people that see these things face on, he said they don't attack like that. He said they'll bluff charge you. He said, but what they'll do is they'll melt into the woods and then they'll attack you from the side or they'll grab you from behind and bite the back of your neck. And he said that that's how they attack their prey. And I said, how do you know that? He said, because the old timers said that. They watched them attack cows. They watched them attack horses. They killed horses. They slaughtered dogs. He's like, that's how they did it. He said, and there were people that were killed too. And now he told me this. He said, there's several bodies buried on this property. He goes, I can tell you that right now with certainty, from the old days, from that whole episode that went on, back in those days. So I think that's true. I think that when people see them head on, and I'm not saying this is the whole case, so don't take my word and then somebody gets attacked and like, well, Wolf said you can just stare. No, no. Please don't do this, ladies and gentlemen. Please do not think that you're safe just because you see them head on. But I think it's like that, though. They're ambush predators, dude. I think that that's what they do. I think that when you run into one by itself, according to what Abel told me, he thinks that, or not Abel, Noah, he said that it's like a scout. Or it could be a rogue, because he's like, they're usually not alone. He's like, see, you run in with one by itself and you see it. He's like, it's probably not alone. He said, but if it is, then it's probably just like scouting around, it's like they send one out to go look, reconnaissance, I guess. And, he said that they tend to be, attacked from behind predators because getting hurt, and this is my words, but getting hurt in nature could cost you your life. I mean, they get injured by a knife or a gun or something, bacterial infection sets in, they're dead. Because they don't have antibiotics. A Bigfoot or a dogman or whatever, a wolf, a dog, whatever that lives wild, there's no coming back from an injury. A lot of times that's it. You just die. But according to what Abel told me, and I asked him about that later, I got his opinion, which they're differing opinions, differing school of thoughts about everything. And Abel said that he believes that they heal really quickly. Because he said that there was one that lived out on the property that only had one paw. Its front paw was gone, like it had been chopped off. And he said that he would see it and that it would hop around on 3 legs and then it would get up and run around on 2 legs. He said, but its front forearm or forepaw, whatever, was gone. He said that that one was a gray one. And he said that that's the one, they call it the chicken killer, that it goes into the chicken coops and raids the chicken coops and that it eats eggs and stuff. So that's weird. I mean, like he told me about that. So, this thing actually lost its paw. And I've seen stories or heard stories of bears or whatever having like one paw. I've never actually seen it, but I've heard of it happening and being able to survive. But it's very rare that an animal will lose a limb or have an injury and just be able to recover fully and live. I was talking to my friend about these guys, my friend who's a Bigfoot researcher, and we were talking about the different people that we talked to and how it's crazy because how do these people stay living on these properties? I look at it like this. I lived in a house that had a lot of paranormal activity that took place when I was younger. It didn't happen all the time. It was like sometimes it was there, sometimes it wasn't. And most of the time it was a very nice, peaceful place to live. And I liked living there. Stuff went on. I'm not even going to get into stuff. I don't want to go there. That's a whole nother deal. But it didn't happen all the time. And I guess it affected other people worse than it did me. So I guess it was just one of those things. These guys grew up there from the time that they were boys, little boys. They were born there, raised there, their whole lives. So I guess that's all they know, that it's become normal to them. The only time that Noah ever deviated from his life there was when he went away to war. So that ain't like a good experience. It's not like he's going to go, wow, I had such a great time overseas. I think that I need to expand my horizons. No, the only time he ever left was to do a horrible job that he was forced into, so it's home to them. It's home. That's all they know, And one other thing I was going to tell you, there was one story that I knew about Andrew, and this is from his son, Jerry. Abel and Noah, they all pretty much told me the same thing about him. They said that the reason that Andrew doesn't talk about any of these things is because he was taken, for lack of a better word, I guess, kidnapped. They said that he was swiped, taken, whatever, by one of these things, and that it kept him out in the woods, and that he was playing with a smaller one when he was little. He would always wander off, like always head in the clouds, is what Abel said. And that he wandered off too close to the wood line and was playing with one of these little ones, and that it lured him into the woods. Well, his words, that it lured him. And that this female took him and tried to just hold him. And he said that when he came back, he told the story, and then he never would talk about it again, ever in his whole life. He never spoke of it again. And he would never talk about it, he never wanted to bring it up. He was one of the people that was never okay with Stripes being on the property. He was never okay with it. And one of the things that Abel and his wife died a few years ago. She died of cancer. I wish I could have talked to her, but he said that him and his wife continued to have relations with Stripes, and that sometimes they would lay food out on the edge of the property and that sometimes a head of cattle would get taken, and that this is weird. He believes Stripes was the one doing it, would leave a deer carcass like in exchange. You see what I'm saying? Like trading. And, Andrew, he's Jerry and them's dad. He was against the acclamation of this thing being, he didn't like it being around. He never trusted it. He had always told Jerry and them to be careful from these things. And I don't know what happened. If he got taken and this thing let him go, then I guess they're not all bad. Noah seems to think that Abel has this, he's deluded to think that they're okay. But Abel says that he's under no illusions. He's like, there's good ones and there's bad ones. And he goes, and I know that I had a good one. I know in my heart he was a good guy. But these other ones, he goes, I don't trust them. I don't even trust the ones that he had as pups. He goes, I don't know them, I knew him when he was around. I was safe, but I don't believe that they won't hurt you. He's like, I don't believe that you can just be completely safe from anything that's a large predator. And I understand that. People in Africa live around hyenas and lions. They're there. They can kill you. It happens sometimes. But what do? I mean, there's nothing you can really do. You just got to keep your eyes and ears open. People that live in America, in a city in particular, there's no way. I mean, you have people that are criminals that are bad. You got to watch out. But the odds of it are so, it's like, dude, you're dealing with civilization. You're out in the wild, dude. Anything that's out there can just kill and eat you. And you have to understand that. And I guess these guys living in the middle of nowhere, that's what happens. I mean, it's like a daily thing for them. They don't have any illusions. They know that when they go out, that they could maybe not come back. I can't imagine living like that. I couldn't do it. There's no way I could do it. I mean, I saw one time and that was all it took, But I guess if you've grown up with it and you've been taught about it since you were babies, I guess that their whole perception is just completely different. One other thing I was going to tell you too, I was told that every once in a while they would get these weird like little gifts that would be left on the property that looked like, to them it looked like sticks tied together with like gut, and they would be in weird shapes like snowflake looking things, I don't know. And they don't know what it is, like if that's their way of giving you a gift, like a decoration, or what it stands for or what it was, but they do believe that those things are from the dogman. From the wolves, as they call them. I was going to tell you a funny story, and I know I told you in the pre-interview. Back in January, they had a quinceañera out there. Now, my mother is Mexican, and I know how it goes. And Noah's a real funny guy, man. He's really, really a funny guy. But he was saying that his primo, his cousin, told him, hey, man, let us come out there and have the big party out there at your house. Get that big ranch. And he told him, because Abel had already told him no. And so he said, no, and he kept, being real pushy. So he goes, one night we got to drinking. And so I said, okay, fine. Come out to the property. You can bring them out. He goes, but I got to warn you. He goes, we got these wolves out here. And his cousin just kind of laughed, because I guess the ones that live in town, they don't really all, the way it seems to me is that they don't grasp the enormity of the real problem. So I don't know if those are the right words, but it just seems like to me that they're not getting it. Even the ones that seem to know, because Noah said that some of them do know, because we talked about that. But he said that they had a quinceañera out there for his great niece. So anyway, he said that about midnight, he was starting to get really tired. He said that the whole woods, I guess, because they were out, being loud. He said that they just erupted with howls. And he said that him and his brother Joseph, they knew exactly what it was. And they just kind of looked at each other and smiled. And he said that it was so loud and it was so persistent. Eventually, everybody just kind of stopped dancing, stopped partying, and was just sitting there listening to it. He said that it was echoing. It was scary. And he said that he's heard it before. He's used to it. He said that if you took like 50 wolves and had them howl at one time, that's what it sounded like. And he said that it was just so loud and that everybody was just kind of like stopped. And he said that everybody just had this stunned look on their face like they were waiting for something to happen. And then he said, okay, folks, party's over. And he told them, he goes, I was so glad that it interrupted everybody's festivities so he could like go to sleep. And he said that his one cousin, she told him, she goes, man, you got a lot of coyotes out on the property. And he's like, those aren't coyotes. And she's like, what are they? He goes, you don't want to know. And she just kind of gave him a puzzled look, and then he went inside and went to sleep, and everybody left. So I guess that's the upside. If you got relatives over and you want them to leave, well, the wolves ran them off. I don't know how he could do it. But another point to that, supposedly, and this is what Noah had told me, and so I asked Abel about it, that dog man saved his life. It saved him from a fire because this is what Abel said. He used to drink a fifth of Jack every day. He had a drinking problem real bad because he had a wife that actually had passed away before the one that he ended up being married to for a long, long time. I guess he said he got married when he was 19 and that she had a car accident. And then he got remarried in his early 20s, and I guess that was the one that became really close with that dog man. So he developed a drinking problem, and I guess one night his wife, she would leave periodically to go out of town or whatever. I don't know what she did, but he said that whenever she wasn't around, he would get real depressed. This is what Noah said, actually. And he said that he was like codependent, basically. If he didn't have his wife around, he felt like he would get real depressed. And so this was years after, and he thinks that he was pining over his first wife, which he never got over, supposedly. This is Noah telling me this. But he said that he would drink himself into a stupor, and Abel confirmed that. He said, yeah, before I found Jesus, before I found God, I drank a lot, and I would imbibe regularly, and that's his exact words. Like I said, he's a pretty articulate guy, but he said that I used to smoke a cigar and I would drink whiskey, and that one night I fell asleep. And he said earlier that day, he had seen his boy, as he called them, Stripes, looking through the window at him. And he said that he had taught him how to wave. Now, I don't know if that's true or if he was just pulling my leg, but he said he could wave. He would like acknowledge him. And he saw him looking in the window, and he just kind of waved at him. And he fell asleep. Now, there was a fire. He doesn't remember anything. He just remembers waking up outside of the house that was burned down. And this was the house that he had built that was behind their ancestral boyhood home that his dad Adam had built. And he eventually moved into that main house or whatever because his older brother Adam had moved further off and built another plot. Now what he's living in is essentially their boyhood home. He has that house. It's just him there now. He's a widower or whatever. And so he believes, and Noah believes it too, that Stripes saved his life, that he saw him fall asleep and the fire started. He took him and brought him out of it. I don't know. I mean, maybe if he wouldn't have acclimated that dog man to humans, he wouldn't be alive right now to be even interviewed about it. And he's got two sons, and I guess one of them works in the oil fields and the other one is a military life or whatever, but he said that his sons got to know these critters too. He said that one of his sons had a relationship not too unsimilar to the one he had with Stripes with one of the females that was younger generation. So I don't know. He said that when he was younger, his son gave one of them a baseball. He don't know what he did with it, but he just said that he gave him a baseball. And I was like, did they play with it? Or he goes, I don't know. He goes, you'd have to ask my son about that. But one thing Noah did say, he said, I don't give a if these wolves can do tricks, dance. He goes, I don't care. He goes, I don't like them. I don't trust them. He said that he would see his brother out there, like giving him food or whatever. And he was just like, what a fool. What a fool. And he thinks that one of those that he raised the rifle at might have been Stripes or one of his people or whatever. But he said that he didn't care. He's like, I told my brother, that if that thing comes near me, I'm going to shoot it. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Of course, he was overseas. He was in Vietnam when all this was going on. So he comes back and there's like this dog man that they had befriended or whatever, and he never saw it. There were pictures of it. Well, I should say picture because when I asked Abel about it, he said that there was a photo. But of course there was a fire, so he lost everything he owned, But he said that according to him, sometimes he would go out into the woods and he would play his guitar and he knew that they were around listening, that they liked it. When I told Noah that, Noah was like, he's a fool. He's an old fool, man. He's like, one of these days he's going to get eaten by one of those things. He's going to know what I'm talking about. But to me, Noah has not had a lot of interaction with these things. So what does he really know? I mean, all he knows is he doesn't like these things. He doesn't like them on the property. And he said that if he could, he would kill them all. So that's his take on it. That's how he feels. Abel doesn't feel that way. Abel feels like, there's peace. If you leave them alone, they leave you alone. Like he said, he's like, I'm pushing 80 and I'm still alive. And I've had lots of interactions with these things. He's like, if they were really all that bad, as Noah paints the picture, that they are, he's like, we'd all be dead. And he said, it's like anything else. He goes, you can take a bear or a cougar and you can domesticate it. He said, I had a friend that had a mountain lion that was domesticated and she was just like a house cat, just bigger. He goes, it just depends. He said, and there's good ones and there's bad ones. It's like that with animals. It's like that with people. It's like that with everything. I work for a large company that builds homes in and around the Austin area. I can't give the name of it, of course, but it's a client of ours, and they have a lot of contractors that work for them. Working for these companies, we're there late at night. We get there in the early evening, and we're there all night, and we're there till the morning. And most of the contractors arrive before we leave. So you get to know the people that work there. And you become friends with them, a lot of them. If you're doing your job, usually they like that you're there and you guard their stuff. They can leave their stuff there. They know that it's not going to get stolen. And we have a pretty good track record. We've worked for a lot of big companies. And so I got to be friends with a few of these contractors, and that's how I met the people that I'm going to talk about today. These stories were given to me back in like June, but I haven't had a chance to scratch my head, much less get in touch with you to tell you, hey, I got some information. And at the time, I like to hear people's encounters, any kind of paranormal encounters, whether it's ghosts or anything. I'll listen to somebody talk about that, and sometimes I guess I can be steering the conversation that way just to see if I can find something from somebody that knows about something that may have happened to them. But this particular gentleman that I'm going to talk about, we became friends. And the reason that me and him began to talk about this subject is because he heard me listening to your show. I was listening to your show one morning, and he came in. He was standing outside talking to the guy that does the sod. This guy that I'm going to tell you about, I'm going to call him Jerry, and I'm going to call him Hernandez. That's not his real name, but I told him that I have permission to tell his stories, but I don't really want to say his real name because I don't want people harassing him or going onto his property. When I was listening to your show, he came up to me and we started talking, and your show was playing, and I work so much that I have to work out on post. So when I'm out in the post, a lot of times I'll take my kettlebells and my weights and I'll be out there lifting. I usually wait until right before dawn to do it. So I was out there lifting, and it sounds kind of silly, but you have to stay in shape. So anyways, he comes up to me and he starts BSing with me like he always does. The show was playing and there was one of your guests. I'm not going to mention it, whatever, but he was listening. He kind of started listening and he goes, what is she talking about? And I said, it's a show called, and for a minute there, I thought this guy's he's going to think I'm crazy. You know what I mean? Like I didn't want to start, I didn't start going, hey, yeah, I saw something and did you see anything? That's not how it happened. It just kind of happened naturally. And I told him, I said, what's a show? It's called Dogman Encounters. And he just at first he kind of laughed, like kind of scoffed. And I thought, oh man, this dude, he already thinks this is silly. So I cut it off. No offense, Vic, but I cut the show off. And so we started talking and he's like, what is a dogman? Like, what is that? And I started to describe it to him. I said, well, what it is these people go on this show. And at that point, I didn't tell him that I'd been on your show. I said, these people go on this show and they talk about their encounters. They see these things that look like werewolves. And he's like, really? And I said, yeah, but the term has become a catch-all term for any of these creatures that people see. It's called dogman. And he's like, dogman? I said, yeah, that's what it's called. And he was like, well, that's interesting. He's like, now these dogmen, what do they look like? And I said, well, it varies. People see different versions of this, but roughly it's a werewolf. That's what it looks like, a traditional werewolf, something on two legs. At that point, he kind of snapped to, and he was like, holy, I don't want to say the curse word, but holy crap. He goes, we've been seeing these things on my property since I was a kid. And that's when I asked him, I was like, where do you live? And he's like, I live, and he told me, outside of Austin, and I'll give you the town that it's close by to, but that's as far as I'm going to go, near Wimberley. It's out by the Blanco River. It's outside of Wimberley. So anyway, he tells me they had been seeing these things for a long time. And when I asked him to elaborate further, I said, well, have you seen anything? Did you see something? He's like, yeah. He's like, I saw one time, and that was it. He's like, but my family can tell you a lot of different stories about this. Now, his family works with him. He's the foreman for his crew. They install the cabinets and do the counters and all that. And his uncle, his dad's youngest brother, he works with him, and so does his other brother, his younger brother. But they were working on a different site. And that other site I worked at periodically too. Wherever I was needed, I would fill in. Wherever I couldn't put a guard, I would do it myself. So I knew who he was talking about. Now, his younger brother, I'm not going to give his name either. I'm going to call him Robert or Robbie. He had a pretty terrifying encounter. Me and you had discussed that, and I'm going to give the details about that encounter. But first, I wanted to get into what he told me. Now, at that point in time, the conversation just kind of ended. He says, hey, I got to get back to work, but I'll talk to you later. So he went back in and he started doing what he was doing, and I finished my sets and I went home. But the next day, I was eager to see him again. So I came in a little bit early. He was finishing up when I got there. Now, the funny thing was, I pay attention to details. Him and his uncle, they would always leave before dark. Now, a lot of these workers, these contractors, the drywallers, whatever, they'll stay and they'll work past dark. But he was always packed up and ready to go by dark. So I got there early and I started shooting the breeze with him. And I mentioned that to him. I said, hey, you about to leave? And he said, yeah, I'm about to take off. And I said, why do you always leave before dark? And he kind of smiled and he goes, man, let me tell you, I don't stay any of these job sites after dark. He's like, we're out in the country right now. I just don't trust it. And so when I questioned him about it, I kind of lead it into it. I said, does this pertain to that thing that we were talking about? And he's like, yeah, I guess. I said, what happened to you? Do you mind telling me? And he kind of looked at me and he goes, man, you think I was crazy. And I said, look, I was listening to that show. I opened up to him and I said, look, I had an encounter myself with one of these things. And he's like, mentiroso, that means liar in Spanish. And I said, no. I said, for real. I said, I'll tell you what happened to me if you have a little bit of time. And he goes, yeah. So he went and sat down on the tailgate and we started bull crapping. And one of his guys was with him and they were standing there. And he said, are you going to tell him about this thing that happened to you? And he goes, well, I'm going to hear his story first. So I said, all right. Started talking to him and I told him about my encounter. Looked him dead in his eye and told him everything that had happened to me. And I told him that I had heard a lot of stories over the years from people who have had similar encounters with these things. Now, it's interesting when I talked to his people, when they talked about their encounters, they never called it a wolf man or a werewolf. They always just said these things or these creatures. They didn't really have a name for it, which makes sense why he didn't know what the heck a dog man was. Because I guess not everybody is as interested as we are in finding the truth about what these things are. They're just like, hey, they're on our property. That's just the reality they deal with. But apparently a lot of people in that area have seen these things. They know what they are. A little sidelight before I go any further. Years ago, I used to go out with a girl. Her family was from Blanco. Her mother lived in Blanco. And I remember they lived out on the edge of town. And we went out there a couple times. It was nice. It was like fall. We were out on the porch in the backyard. And right before dark, they just got up and everybody went inside. And I was like, that's kind of odd. And I remember asking her mother, is there a reason why everybody just packed up and went in? She goes, oh, we just don't hang out after dark outside. She's like, there's prowlers. And I'm like, prowlers? I know country folk had always spoke of these supposed prowlers. I've heard all these stories about people that just prowled around, and I thought that was kind of a flimsy excuse. I didn't ask for any explanations. I wasn't going to press her mother and be like, tell me the real reason. But looking back on that, I always thought that was odd. So anyways, I don't know if that has anything to do with this, but it's in the same region. So I'm thinking, who knows? Maybe there is something to this. I know I've heard a lot of stories in that region about ghosts and a lot of different activity. There's a place called Devil's Backbone. It's been on Unsolved Mysteries. Basically, a lot of people talking about their encounters with spirits. So I know that the region is considered haunted, but I had never heard anybody talk about dogman activity. And of course, to us here in Texas, I think dogman is probably only about a 10-year-old term. It's not really something that people have ever called these things. I know in my hometown, we don't call them dogman. Anyways, let me get back to this. His encounter was pretty basic. It wasn't real terrifying. There wasn't a lot of drama involved, but it gave him proof that what his uncles and his grandfather and his dad had been saying over the years was legit. It was real. And so what happened was, he said it was the day before Christmas Eve, So I guess this would have been December 23rd. He told me the year too. He said it was 2006. And he said that his little kids were decorating the Christmas tree with some pine cones or something. And his youngest daughter at that time, he said she was like 4 or 5. I can't remember which. And he said his little boy was like 8 or 9. I think he said he was 8. I don't remember the ages exactly. Anyways, he said that the little girl and the little boy were looking out the window, and the little boy says, "Look, Daddy, a bunny." And he thought, "Oh, that's odd, a bunny, middle of winter. That's not normal." So he went outside and he looked, and he thought maybe there was like a bunny rabbit that had come out of its burrow or something. So anyway, he came outside to look, and he looked down and he didn't see anything, and the little girl started crying. He didn't know why she was crying, and to this day, he still says he doesn't really know if it was what she was looking at made her cry, or if it was his expression. You know how little kids will follow the parent, and the parent will make an expression, and the child will cry, or whatever. But he said she started bawling, and so he picked her up, and when he picked her up, and he got her right there in his arms, he looked straight ahead. That's when he saw this thing that was halfway behind the tree, and it had his arm around the tree, that it came out from behind the tree. And he said, I saw it clear as day. And he said this tree was about 60 yards from the house, and it was just standing there looking right at him. When I asked him, how big do you estimate this thing to have been? His exact words to me, he said it was probably about 7 feet tall. And he said it had reddish brown fur and an elongated snout and pointy ears. And he said he didn't remember the hands or the feet. He just remembers looking at the creature from a distance, and he saw that. He said that he called his wife, and he was like, "Honey, can you come take the kid," or whatever? And she was like, "I'm busy," because she was making tamales. And he said, "Can you come take the kid? Come here now." And so she came out to the living room. He gave her the child, and he's like, "I need to go get my gun." And she's like, "Why?" And he pointed to the window. And the little boy, I guess, was still kind of excited. He thought it was like some kind of big bunny, because he said it had really tall ears, which was weird. Like, I don't remember him going into detail about the ears, but he did tell me that it had big ears. I was in my mind thinking like Wile E. Coyote, you know, like the big ears. And I was thinking, I wonder how big these ears were that the little kid would think that it looked like a bunny. But anyway, I should have asked more details, but I didn't. I didn't want to interrupt him. He was telling the story. And he went inside, grabbed his .30-06 and went back out and was going to take a shot at it. He goes out onto the porch, and it's gone. Now, here's the question I asked him. I said, "Jerry, you have your kids and your wife there. You weren't worried about going out on the porch, this thing maybe becoming aggressive and attacking?" And he said, "No, I always felt pretty secure around my property." He's like, "But the funny thing was, I have 4 big dogs, and none of them were anywhere to be found." And he said, at that point, I'd had to go check the property and just make sure this thing wasn't lurking around, because I was worried. And so I said, "Where were the dogs?" He says, "Well, I don't know." At that point, he didn't see the dogs, and they weren't barking, which is weird. So he goes around, he checks the front of the property, he walks around the back of the property. Once he gets around the back of the property, the dogs were all in the backyard by one corner of the house on the opposite end from where he was at. So the dogs all kind of ran up to him and were like all close to him. Now, I thought, maybe it's because he has like small wimpy dogs or something. He said he had big dogs, but not all big dogs are tough. I mean, like a lab is not a really vicious dog. So what kind of dogs did you have? Now, he told me he had 2 German Shepherds, a pit bull mix. Yeah, and I'm thinking they're all big dogs. They're all pretty tough dogs. He said I had a pretty tough mutt. He was just mixed up. He said, but all 4 of them were pretty rough trade. And so I'm thinking, why were they not barking? That's weird. I don't even know why they would not be growling or barking if something's that close to the house. He couldn't figure it out either, and his wife was frantic to make him come back inside. And as he told me, growing up over the years, he had heard stories about these things, but he had never seen one before. Now, that was his sole encounter, because he did tell me that was the only thing that he had ever seen, was that one particular creature. And I told him, I said, wow, that's a crazy story. And he said, but, he goes, my family has seen these things. He goes, I grew up hearing stories about these things. And he goes, and until my brother had his encounter, I always just kind of thought it was just stories they told us to scare us, to keep us safe, come inside when it's dark. But, most country people, they're not afraid of the dark, and they don't go inside when it's dark. They're not worried about the boogeyman. They live out in the country. They're used to seeing bobcats, coyotes, coy wolves, whatever. I mean, just me on post, I've seen bobcats and I've seen coyotes and all kinds of manner of animals, big old bucks. they'll come right through wherever you're working. You know, if you're out there on the edge of the woods, Austin is surrounded by woods, and we have a lake. Well, it's the Lower Colorado River, and it crisscrosses all over this area. It's so wide, they call it Lake Austin, Town Lake, and then Lake Travis, but it's really just the Lower Colorado River in different areas. So, anyways, he was saying he never thought anything of it. But after that, after he actually saw one and knew 100% that it was real, he was like, dude, he had already started to kind of believe, but he said that when his brother had his encounter, that's when he knew this was real. That one time he saw something, that was the nail in the coffin. And now what he told me was his brother had had an encounter and that I should ask his brother about his encounter because it was a lot more terrifying than what had happened to him. This time he said, if you count what happened with my brother, he's like, I guess I've seen it twice, but I don't really want to say it because it was so dark that I didn't really get a good look at it. But his brother did. So what I did was when I worked the other site, I purposely went to work the other site one day. And I went in early at that site. I switched with the guard so I could talk to his brother because his brother was the lead foreman over at the other site. And so I went over there and I talked to him, and they were installing the cabinets or whatever like they always do. And I had talked to his brother on a few occasions, not as many times as I talked to Jerry, but I had met his brother before, and I had worked that site on occasion, but it wasn't a regular thing. So I kind of pinned him down. I said, hey, man, you got a minute? And he said, yeah, dude, I'm getting ready to leave. And they were packing up their stuff. And same thing as I did with Jerry. I said, hey, I was just curious. I had talked to your brother about this dogman encounter you had. And he kind of looked at me and I said, dogman, I know that you probably don't know that term. It's what people call these things that you guys were seeing on the property. And he kind of shook his head. He said, oh, gotcha. Okay. And I said, can you tell me what happened with your encounter? And he was like, sure, but I can't do it today. I'm in a hurry. So I made it a point to go back, you know, that same site, go in early, whatever. So the next time I saw him, he actually had a friend with him the next day. And I guess this guy was a guy that worked with him off and on or whatever. And he was also a neighbor who actually that neighbor, his name is Shane. That's what I'm going to call him. It was actually his family's property. And I guess Jerry and his brother Robbie's grandfather actually worked on that property for Shane's great-grandfather, if you're following me. And I guess that it was all Shane's great-grandfather's property at one time. And they actually bought, I guess his grandfather he was a vaquero. He was a cowboy. He worked for them. They had a bunch of cattle out there. And he was like the lead guy for them for a long time. And I guess when they decided to partition the land off and sell it, he bought a tract of that land. His land lies to the south, kind of the southwest from what they described to me, of Shane's property. Now, Shane is the guy that was there that day with him. And he said, this is Shane. He's our neighbor, our nearest neighbor. And he's got 147 acres of land where he lives. And then their uncle, which would be, I'm trying not to get you confused here, would be Robbie and Jerry, the guy that told me his encounter. Their uncle Abel and their uncle Noah have tracts of land that were passed down from their grandfather. And their dad's name is Andrew. Okay. So there were 4 brothers. There was Andrew, Noah, Abel, and then the other guy they called Jojo. He's the youngest, Joseph. Now he had an encounter too that I'm going to get into, but it wasn't on the ranch. He doesn't live out on the ranch. He lives in Buda. Okay. And little backstory to him, he was kind of the black sheep of the family. He always kind of made fun of these guys, like, oh yeah, you're seeing these kokoi, and kind of joked about it and thought it was cute and funny to tease them. And he had told them, yeah, if I ever see one of these things, I'm going to knock it out. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And they were just like, yeah, right. Well, anyways, he worked directly with Jerry over at the first site that I was telling you about. Now I would see him regularly, and that night, Jerry and his uncle, they showed up over there at the property where I had gone in to work early the second time. And they were all there. They all showed up, and they were standing around having a beer, because a lot of times these contractors will do that. And usually I don't allow that, but they're pretty good guys, and we had agreed they were going to tell me the stories. So I had them all there together, and Robbie told me his story. I keep trying to make sure I say that name and not his real name. His story was really scary. Now, what happened to him, and this guy, when he was telling me this story, he looked me right in my eye. I could tell this guy wasn't lying. I mean, I guess it is possible that these guys all got together and conspired to lie to me, maybe thinking I was gullible or something, but I don't believe that. They were very sincere about it, and they were very open and honest about it. And Robbie told me that when he was 17 years old, that he was out on his four-wheeler riding around on the property. His mother was always very adamant about him coming home on time, and he said that she would always use the excuse of coming home for dinner to get him to come home before dark. And he was the youngest. He was the youngest of Andrew's sons, okay? And that, like I said, is the four brothers, and their dad was the one that bought the property. So Jerry and Robbie, and then their brother, Andre, they are all the sons of Andrew. And now Andrew would be the youngest son, or the second to youngest son of those four brothers I was telling you about. And those are all the neighbors of Shane. Okay? So if you follow that, okay, I hope everybody can follow that. Okay, so anyways, that's the back, that, just to let you know. And this property is pretty big. It's well over 1,000 acres of altogether. It's pretty big. So anyways, what these guys were telling me was that each one of them had something like some sort of encounter. So we'll start with Robbie's encounter. He was out on his ATV. He rode out to a stand that they had that they would use to hunt hogs. And in Texas, everybody knows Texas, there's hogs everywhere. We have a problem with hogs. Most counties offer bounties on hogs. If you bring them a tail, like I was telling you, Vic, me and a buddy of mine were in Lockhart, and he was shooting them off of his back porch out on the edge of town. Well, out in the country, but it's still it's not far out of town. And that's because there's so many. They're just everywhere. They're causing a lot of problems. They're a nuisance animal. So anyways, he was telling me this story, and he said that he was in the stand hunting hogs, and his mother called. And he told her, look, I'm out here in the stand. I'm trying to kill something. He was learning how to bow hunt. So he had his bow with him. Now, he did say he had a pistol, too. So he told me, he said, I'm sitting there with my bow. For the first time, he's like, I really told my mom, look, I'll be home when I'm ready. And she got upset, and he hung up. So he sat there for a couple more hours, and right before it got dark, he said that the sun was already starting to go down in the back, the backdrop, because he was facing the west. He said that there's a lot of trees. It's kind of like a hollow. There's a lot of trees there, and there's like a little clearing. And he said that he saw something, the bushes start to move, and he saw something. He thought that, first he said he thought it dropped down out of a tree. And then he thought, well, that can't be right. But then he said that it was kind of creeping around behind some bushes. And he thought he saw the silhouette of this thing stand up. And then he thought, maybe my eyes are playing tricks on me. But then it was on all fours again. And he thought, is this a bear? And then he thought, no way, there's no bears out here, And so he had some binoculars. He said, so he lifted up the binoculars and he looked, and he said he saw like what looked like an ear, like a canine ear. That's the first thing he told me. What his exact words were, a wolf's ear, but I'm assuming canine, whatever. And so he said it looked like a wolf. And he said that it went through his mind that it could be something, but then he thought there's coy wolves. Maybe that's what it is. At that time, people didn't know what a coy wolf was. These really large coyotes that look like wolves, but now we know that they're coy wolves. They're a hybrid that have reached all the way down here to Texas. So anyway, he thought, I'm going to take a shot at this thing, but it never would come out into the clearing. So he's like, me being stupid and young, I whistled at it to see if it would respond and come out into the clearing so I could take a shot at it. And he said when he did this thing, it came out into the clearing, but it stood up on two legs. And he said literally when this thing stood out in front of him, and I asked him, I said, what was the distance from you to that thing? He said it was probably, at first he said that it was about 100 yards. That's what he said at first. And then I said 100 yards. It was that far. And then he started estimating, and he said, no, it couldn't have been about 100. It could have been about 75 yards. So I'm going to assume that it was probably a pretty good distance at that point, that he had to look at it with binoculars. Maybe that's somewhere between 75 and 100 yards. That's the best distance that he could come up with, best I could come up with. And I asked him, I said, well, you've been out to that spot before, right? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, you've been out there since? And he said, no. He had never gone back out there to relive that and to see, where that, he said, I never even go to that part of the property ever. Now, this place where he was at was in the middle property. Like I said, their property is on the furthest south end of this whole tract of what used to be the Hitchens Ranch. Now, Hitchens is not their real last name. That's why but that's Shane's property. Now, that was his great grandfather had bought that land and cleared it out, and they used it to raise cattle and sheep. Well, sheep on one side, cattle on the other. So what he told me was, it was on Noah's property. Now, Noah's property, the way it's laid out, the way they described it to me was Andrew, their dad, he had the further south property, and then there was Noah's property in the middle, and then further north and a little bit to the west was Abel's property, and then a little further west and to the north was Shane's property. Okay. Now, that's how the land was laid out. So he was technically on what was Noah's property. That was his uncle. And Noah was the oldest brother. I believe he was the oldest brother. So anyway, he was on Noah's property, and he's like, I've never been back to that part of the property ever again. I never went back. He's like, I didn't go and judge the distance. So we kind of came up with a number, maybe 7,500 yards. So this thing, he said it just started to walk toward him, and he said it was so big that the sun going down in the back behind the trees, you could still see it kind of breaking through the trees. He said it blocked out the sun. And I was like, wow, that's a big creature, from where it was standing. He said, there's no, I can't even tell you how much it weighed. It was huge. It was just gigantic. And he said that from what he saw, it was a reddish brown color. Once again, that same color. And that it was coming toward him, just walking like a man, And I said, did it kind of lurch hunched over, or was it walking straight? He said, no, just like a man would walk, swinging its arms sideways. He said the arms were long. And he said that his body was built like a bodybuilder, but it had a huge, gigantic wolf head on it. And I said, what about the legs? He's like, I didn't really notice the legs at that time. He goes, it was just coming straight at me. I didn't see, I said, well, a lot of people report that they're backward bent legs. And he said he didn't notice that. So anyway, he's getting ready to leave. And then he's thinking, I don't know if I should try to get to my ATV and take off, and then this thing's going to follow me, or should I wait till it gets closer and try to kill it? All these things are going through his mind. And when he's telling me this story, you could tell that he was reliving this account. And I asked him a couple times if he needed to stop. I said, you need to stop or whatever, and he's like, no, I'm good. And everybody was very quiet and respectful, which, these guys are always joking around and they're always messing with each other. And I knew that they were taking it seriously too. I was watching their reactions because I wanted to make sure these guys weren't pulling my leg. So he's sitting there, he's reliving this, and I could tell that it was bothering him. And so anyway, this thing's coming toward him, and he said just then he hears a hog, like a hog snorting, and he could hear little babies like piglets. And he said at that point he had started praying. And in his mind, he says he thinks it was like a miracle, like God delivered him. I mean, like he goes, I'm not kidding, Wolf. He goes, I think that God delivered me. That was his words. I mean, he believes that, and that's fine. I respect that. I don't know what I believe about that or not, but could be just a coincidence. But anyway, a sow with little piglets came out, and he said that thing, it just kneeled down. It got down on all fours like so fast, boom, and then it just kind of like started sauntering toward the edge of the clearing. And he said that at that point he thought that thing was waiting for the sow to come out to ambush it, and so he was like, you know what, this is my chance. And he said that the shed where he was sitting was like a tin shed, so that he was going to have to open the door, and he said that the thing was going to make noise. So he started to open it, and it was like, I can't do the sound effect, but he said it made a scraping noise, and he was like, oh, no, it's going to hear that, and he said that it did. It turned its head and kind of cocked its head and kind of turned it sideways, and he said that it was like sniffing the air. And he said, oh, man, this thing is it's either going to go for me or it's going to go for those hogs. And he said at that point, it sounded like the hogs were moving away. So he thought, these hogs probably got wind of it or something, and they're booking the other direction, and it's not following them. So he just made a break for his four-wheeler, and he took off. And he started it up, and he hauled butt out of there. Now, he said that there's a short trail to get back to the main road, which leads to Noah's house. Now, he was going to try and make a break for his uncle's house. Now, he said that his uncle's house was probably about a 5-minute ride. It wouldn't be that far, but he would have to cut to get there that quickly. He was going to have to cut through a pasture. And he said that there was just a cattle guard right there that goes into that particular pasture, so he could just make a break right for it. Well, the problem was that there was this Broford bull, okay, and if you know anything about bulls, Brofords are like the meanest. What it is a heifer cow or bull that's been bred with a Brahma. and they're notoriously mean-spirited animals. They're not friendly at all, and they have a really, really nasty disposition. So anyway, he's like, I was going to have to contend with that bull. And he said, never fails. You go into that pasture, and the bull's name was Simon. That's what they told me. And he said, when you go into that pasture, he automatically just comes and he defends his territory. What they told me was that bull was so mean that it had killed a younger, smaller bull. It had actually sired. So it killed its own offspring. So this thing was a vicious animal, and he wasn't kind to people going into his area, his territory. And so they had told me before that they had had cattle that had been killed. That, it was a regular occurrence, and it was to the point where Shane was about to just quit messing with them. He said the only kind of cattle he could keep out there, this is what Shane had told me, was longhorns, because they were so mean and had big old horns that for whatever reason, these creatures wouldn't really mess with them. Well, if you had anything else, like any kind of cows of any kind of other hornless anything, they were going to attack it. So they had drove him out of the cattle business altogether. But this Broford bull, obviously, they had respect for it. It had never been messed with because it was so big. It was about 1,800 pounds, according to what they were telling me. And he said this thing could run, too. It was fast, which is crazy. You think about a giant animal moving that fast. Well, this thing made a beeline for him, and I see that thing coming out onto the main road, and it's following me. He's like, it is behind me. And he goes, and when I crossed over the cattle guard and I hugged I just went and I went straight to the fence line as far away as I could from Simon. And Simon was on the clear on the other side of the pasture. He came running over there to see what was up, who's in my enclosure. And he just said, I'm going to try and make it as fast as I can to the back fence. Well, he said the problem was that there were all these divots and holes in that ground where he was riding. And so he said that he was jumping and bouncing and he couldn't really go super fast. He said he was catching air a couple times and coming down on the front, and he thought he was going to flip at one point. And he's like, something's going to get me. It's either going to be the bull or it's going to be that thing. And he's going over in his mind, like, which way do I want to die? Do I want to be gored to death or do I want to be eaten? So this is going on in this kid's head. He's 17 years old. It's got to be a traumatizing experience. So he said he's trying to go as fast as he can, but he's still trying to control this ATV. And when he gets to a certain point, he sees that the bull is going to meet him at some point. And he said his only chance was to get off of that ATV and try to hop over a barbed wire fence that was reinforced with an electrical fence. So he was going to get messed up. So he was like, I can try to open the gate, but I'd have to undo it and all that. And he said that there was no way that he was going to be able to get through that. So he decided to just jump off the ATV. He said it was like he had slowed down as much as he could. He just kind of jumped and hopped up a tree. He climbed up a tree. He said there was like a mid-sized oak tree, and he climbed up it, and no sooner he got halfway up, that bull was right at the base of it. So he goes, I'm looking down, and I got this bull at the base of this tree, and he goes, I don't know what to do. And he said, and I looked off in the distance, and he goes, and I could see that thing, the way he described it, which was the dog man. And he said that it had flattened itself onto the ground, and it was like you could see its back, and you could kind of see the top of the head or whatever. And he said that it was laying down, hiding in the grass at the front of the pasture. So this thing was not going to contend with that bull. I guess it just wasn't going to do it. And he said that it just sat there. And he said this thing was big, really big. So that bull must have been really nasty for that thing to not try to even, whatever. He said that it just sat there. And he said that he sat there up in that tree, and he was like, where's my phone? He pulled his phone out, and his phone was dead. So there was no calling for help. There was no nothing, and he was like, I don't know what I could do. There's nothing I could do. I was just stuck. I'm just sitting in this tree. And he goes, and I had told my mom basically to pound salt. So he goes, I figured nobody was coming to look for me because, they were just going to let me do what I wanted. And he said, I kept regretting telling her, she goes, I should have just left when she called me. He kept telling me that. So anyways, he's sitting up in this tree, and he says finally it gets dark. The bull's still at the base of the tree, and that thing is still crouched down, sitting there just waiting for him. And so he figured, if this bull gets tired and moves away from the tree, then I can get out of here. I can jump the fence maybe, and then that thing's probably going to come after me. And he's like, can I make it to the house? These things are going through his head. So finally, at this point, he goes, I saw some headlights coming down the road. And that's when his brother kind of jumped in. And Jerry tells me, he goes, yeah, my mom had come and got us, and we were working on my brother's truck. And they told us to go find your little brother because it's past dark and he hadn't come in yet. And so they were worried about him. And so anyways, they were kind of aggravated by that because they were like, this little turd, he didn't listen, and now we got to go get him and stop what we're doing. So they went out there to go fetch him or whatever. But the dad wasn't there, I guess. And from what they said, their dad was in town. He was with their little sister or whatever getting groceries, and their truck was not running. So they had to walk over to Noah's property. And when they got to the house, they told Noah what happened. They got in his old truck. They went down the dirt road, and they had a big spotlight looking for him. They looked everywhere. They went into the hollow. They didn't see him. They went all over the property. They went into Abel's property, and finally they came back down the opposite way, and that's when they saw Robbie was yelling at him, and they shined the light, and they saw the ATV sitting there. At this point, it had ran out of gas. He didn't even turn it off. He said it just ran out of gas. And that's when they pulled into the pasture. Now, Robbie tells me they should have seen this thing there on the corner of the pasture, crouched down in the grass. He goes, but they drove right by it and they didn't see it. And none of them said that they saw it. So this thing was hiding pretty well. Robbie knew it was there, and he was yelling at him. So this thing is right there. They drive right by it, literally. And he's waving at them. There's something there, and when they pulled up, now this bull, usually there's always at least one person that can handle him. Noah had raised this bull since he was a baby, since it was a calf. So Noah told him, stay in the truck. He got out and he got the bull to back off, and he walked it off to the other side of the pasture. And I guess he did something. I don't know. He put it somewhere. They didn't elaborate on that. But anyway, the first guy out of the truck was his oldest brother, Andre. He gets out of the truck and he's like, come on, dude, get down. And Robbie says, there's a thing sitting there in the corner of the pasture. It chased me into this enclosure. Because they were asking him, why are you in this enclosure? And he's like, this thing is right there. And they're like, what thing? We don't see anything. So they start shining the flashlight, in that area where he's claiming that he's seeing something. And Jerry said, he goes, I was just standing there. I didn't know what to think one way or the other. But he goes, Andre decided to be, because he's always kind of like a bully. The way they described him, he's kind of a bully. So he was like, oh, whatever, dude. It's the Kukui. He's out there in the yeah, right. Okay, whatever. And he said, it's right there. And so when he gets down, he points at it and he shines the light right on it. And he goes, that's a dirt mound. And so he goes, it's a dirt mound. He starts walking toward it. And he goes, let me prove it to you. He goes, there's nothing there. So Robbie and and Jerry are looking at each other. He's like, we looked at each other and kind of shrugged our shoulders like, go ahead, whatever. You're going to walk right up on it. And they're telling him at this point, Jerry's even telling him, hey man, come on, dude. You don't know what that is. Cause like I said, he had seen one. So who knows, dude? This thing is there, So anyways, this part was really crazy. Andre gets right up to the thing about 15 yards away from it. He turns around. He goes, I don't see. This thing stands up behind him. Okay. And they're screaming, hey. And then at that point, his uncle saw it too and was like yelling at him. He's like, hey, Vavoso, look behind you. And that thing is like turned around. Basically one leap, went over the fence and was just not running. They said it just kind of got to the road and just kind of sauntered into the woods. And Andre turned around and saw it right when it jumped over the fence. And he said it just was one leap, boom, and it was over the fence. And this fence is not, it's about chest high. So this thing just jumped right over it and was like over, the other side of the road, And he said that Andre like tripped backwards. Literally, he tried to run and he tripped and fell backwards and like monkey rolled, dropped the flashlight, left it, whatever, and ran back to the truck. And they all scrambled to try to get into the cab, And they were telling Robbie, get in the back. And he was like, no. And they were like fighting and arguing. And Noah tells him, shut up, let's get out of here. And so they drove out through the other pasture. They went through the back way and they drove through the bumpy pastures to get back to Noah's main house. And when they got back to the house, he said we were all just in shock. Now, Jerry said from where he was standing, the angle that he had, he said, I didn't get a good look at it. He goes, I saw something stand up and it was dark, but Andre was kind of in front of it and I was on the other side of the truck. He's like, so I didn't really get a good view. I thought I saw something go across the road. Now, Noah saw it clearly from where he was at. And I guess Robbie, of course, he saw it, and Andre turned around and saw it jump over the fence. So I guess that would be considered Jerry's like second encounter or whatever. But like he said, he didn't get a real good look at it, but he knew what it was, and they were all freaked out because it was interesting that the same color that the one that Jerry saw was what Robbie reported to me, was that it was a reddish brown color. Now I'm thinking, same creature? I don't know. But anyways, I was hoping that Jerry would have been able to elaborate if he thinks that was the same one, because the one he saw was the same color. But, like I said, he said he didn't get a good look at it. So anyway, that was Robbie's encounter. Robbie said he never had another encounter beyond that, but I'm sure that's enough for anybody. I don't think he's going to want to have another. And he said he wasn't going back out to Noah's property for nothing. So that was the end of that. So anyways, the other encounter that I was going to talk about, now this was their neighbor Shane. Now Shane is there, and he's a real country dude. So I'm going to try to use my own words to describe what happened to him. Now his encounter involved him being on horseback. And that was really interesting to me. And I said, now what happened to you? And that was when I just kind of went around the horn and I said, hey, can you tell me? And he's like, well, what happened to me? He's like, first of all, he said, these things have been on my property for a long time. So he had heard stories about them, from all the way back to his grandfather and his great aunt had an encounter. And he said, now this is what happened to me. Now he claims that he was on, like I said, this is their stories, not mine. I'm not, if you think these are lies, it's, this is what they told me. Okay. I can't testify to the veracity of this because I was not a witness to any of these events. All right. So don't shoot the messenger, but this is what he said. Now, this story is really crazy. Like, he said that he was on horseback one day with his wife, and the horse that she was on began to rear and kind of buck a little bit, and it was like they were on this trail. Now, the trail they were on is like literally the boundary between Abel's property and his. Now, like I said, Abel's property is the furthest north of the brothers, of the Hernandez family brother. Not their real name, but anyways. What Shane told me was that her horse kind of started to rear, and he said, we have several horses. And he said that had never happened before, and he thought a snake, so he looked down, he didn't see anything, and the horse just wouldn't go any further, and it started getting real ornery. So he said, you know what? Let's just go back in, so they took the horses back in, and they put them back in the corral, whatever. And they put them back up in the barn. And he said that was just unusual. That had never happened before. So he said he thought that there might have been something there. Now, he said a few days after that, he went out for a trot around the property on his horse, the same one he had that same day, that didn't react the way the other horse had. Now, he said this was a really seasoned mare. He'd been on this horse a lot, and he was out for a trot with that horse and checking his property. He said he got around to that same spot in the trail, and his horse started to act kind of funny and whatever, and he was like, whoa, and he thought, man, this is crazy, this is the same spot where I was at last time. Now, he said at this point, he heard something. He heard like footfall, twigs snapping and breaking, and the tree line that was right there, there's like a ditch. He said there was like a ditch right there, and there was a tree line. He heard twigs and things snapping and breaking, and he thought, what the heck is that? And he looks down, and he sees this thing, what he thought was a giant wolf, walking along the tree line or whatever, and he thought, man, that is weird. What is that? And it's paralleling him and the horse. At this point, the horse wanted nothing to do with it. It wanted to head back to the stable, obviously. So it bucked. He stayed on it, and it bucked, and it threw him off. And he said after a couple of those, it just threw him off, and it was gone. And he said it took off the other side down there's a little embankment, he said there, and then it goes up a little bit, and then there's like the barbed wire fence to Abel's property. And he said that it just jumped onto that fence to try to get over the fence to get back toward the stables. And he said it jumped over the fence and got hung up. And he said at that point, when a horse runs away, they usually run in the direction of where they stable. But this thing was, like his first reaction was just trying to go back to the stables. No, this thing was just trying to get away because it was going toward Abel's property, not the other direction, which is where they live. Which it would have had to go down and around this tree line. So this thing was panicked. It was just sheer panic, So anyway, whatever it was had scared the living crud out of this horse. It had jumped and it caught its leg on the barbed wire. This thing came bounding out of the tree line. Now, like I told you on the pre-interview, Vic, that's not the words he used. He used another word. It was like, I don't know, but anyways, it came bound, in my words, not his, it bounded out onto the road. He said it just kind of sat there like a football player, just staring at him like it was going to form tackle him. And he said he was laying on the ground and he thought maybe he had hurt his tailbone. You know, he felt like it had broken something. He did have a pistol. Now, he said he had a big old .357 pistol, and he said that he pulled it out and he was getting ready to take a shot at this thing, and it went toward the horse. And he said he kind of paused for a second and then he unloaded several rounds. He stood up and he was still kind of in shock, and he was walking backwards. And he said that from what he saw, the thing had stopped. The horse had gotten loose and was running across the pasture into Abel's property. And he said that this thing stopped when he fired the shots. Now, he don't know if he hit it or not, but he said he fired several rounds, and it all happened so fast it was like a blur, in his words. And he said that he leveled the gun at it, and when he did, it crouched down and was snarling and growling and snapping, but it didn't lunge at him. And he said he had his boot was halfway off and he was trying to get his foot in his boot. Now, when he was telling me this story, he was very animated and he was giving me all these physical gestures, and I could get into what he was saying. You know what I mean? At one point, he even kind of was like on the ground, like showing me, you know. So anyway, this guy's giving me this real descriptive physical description of what was going on. I wish I could relay it the way he was telling me, but I'm doing the best I can. And he said that he was trying to get his boot on, you know, and he said that, you know, his arm was all skinned up and he had rocks in his arm, whatever. And he leveled his gun at this thing again to try to, because it was creeping toward him. And he said that it would start to stand up. He would point the gun at it and it would get back down. So that tells me that this thing is cognizant of what that gun is, what it's capable of, what it does. It knew that this thing produces pain, you know? So anyway, his words were, this knew what a gun was. You know, it knew what my pistol was. And so he's like, I'm backing up. And finally I just take off running. And he said that he looked back and the thing didn't follow him. Like, it didn't come bounding down the road at him. He said it didn't follow him at all. And he ran, and he said that the closest to property that he was Abel's house. So he ran over to Abel's house and was like banging on the door and like, hey, you know, and he said that they took him to the hospital. He had a hairline fracture in his lower back, a couple vertebrae, whatever. I think he said he broke a couple toes and his arm was all tore up. But he said when the horse got back to the stable, it made its way back to the house. Horses are smart. They know where to go. But his wife said that the back leg was all tore up. Poor thing was just, it had ripped the leg up pretty bad. Apparently, though, she recovered. Now, here's what's really interesting. He said he didn't see this thing attack the horse. But like he said, it happened so fast, it was like a blur. But there was a really long gash on the right flank of the horse, which would have been the opposite of the way that the horse was facing him from what he was telling me. He don't know how that got there. He said unless this thing was just lightning fast enough to like take a swipe at it and he didn't see it, and then it got back onto the road when he started firing. Because when he said he started shooting, it was just, that was it. It just, you know, that thing was focused on him. This incident he told me about, and I asked him, I said, were there any other incidents involving you? Did anything else happen? He said, no. He said, now my little brother Cody, he has about 10 acres that are basically on the Hitchens property. The way they described Cody, and I ain't met the kid, that's the youngest brother, and he's got another brother that lives in Giddings. But the way that it was described to me by the Hernandez brothers and by Shane was that he's kind of a hardhead, and that he apparently has seen these things 3 different times. One time with his wife, they went out to check because the chickens had been getting harassed and they heard all this noise, and that he saw one. This is the only story that they relayed to me that was about Cody, the younger brother of Shane. And like I said, he lives in a little bottom right there that's literally on Shane's property. You know, he just kind of gave him a spot or whatever. So anyway, he said that his little brother had gone out there, and he said the way they've described him is he's kind of a hardhead. So he goes out there, and he said that this thing was sitting there by the chicken coop, chowing down on chickens and eggs, and it lifted up its head, and it had egg yolk on its face. So it was eating eggs, and I guess it had killed all the chickens, and So he was just infuriated. So Cody, instead of being afraid, like most people would be like, holy crap, his wife freaks out and she runs back to the house. He runs back in there and he's like, I'm going to kill this. So he goes in there and he grabs his 22-250 or whatever and runs. Well, that's, a deer rifle. They said a deer rifle. I'm assuming that's what it was. I don't know. But anyway, he runs back out, and he's going to shoot it. At that point, I told Shane, I said, is this kid crazy? Is he got a mental problem? And they're all kind of like, yeah, he's kind of stupid. And I'm just like, that is insane. Like, I would not go back out and try to shoot something that's just right. It'd just, slaughtered your animals. I understand. And he's angry. But after what these things had reportedly done to these other guys, and I asked him if Cody gave him a description of it. And he said from what he was told, and he had told him and Jerry, both of them, that its fur was gray. And he remembers that. He said it looked just like a timber wolf. That's weird. And he said, but it had these weird backward bent legs and it was crouched down and it had weird looking hands. That tells me, yeah, that's the telltale signs of a dog man. And that's probably what it was. But that the fur was a different color altogether, not the reddish brown color of the ones that they had encountered. This one was gray. So to me, there's definitely a population there. In my mind, that's what I'm thinking. There's a population there. It's not just one critter that's running around terrorizing these people. It's more than one. Now, there's another story that was told to me when I pushed him a little further. I told Shane, I said, you said that there were some stories growing up that you had heard. He said, well, one of the funniest ones in particular was there was a door-to-door salesman that had come out onto the property to sell, I guess, tractor supplies or something. I guess back in the day, these people would go door to door and they would try to get these country folk to buy stuff. I don't know. Anyway, he said it was a salesman and he said he came hauling up the gravel road to the house. Now, this happened on his Aunt Myrtle's property, which is now part of, I guess, the north part of the Hitchens property. That's where her place was. But that would be his grandfather's sister, from what he told me. And she had a husband that lived on the property. And apparently, he wasn't a very nice guy. He was a drunk, and he had beat her, and he was pretty mean. And ultimately, he disappeared. Apparently, like he went out one day and just never came back. And they don't know what happened to him. Now, who knows? I know that he had mentioned that his grandfather and them didn't like the guy. And then, of course, there was an investigation. They never found a body. Maybe the dog men got him. I don't know the whole story, but I know that one time this salesman came up the road and he was honking the horn, and they come out and they're like, who is this guy? What do you want? This is broad daylight. And the guy says, I was going to try and sell you some supplies, but I just would like an escort off of your property. And he's like, what are you talking about? He goes, when I drove through, I just saw something run across the road that looked like it weighed 800 pounds and it was hairy. Can you please just get me off this property? And so the dude was like, they're looking at each other like, is this guy crazy? Well, the thing was, his Aunt Myrtle had told her husband that she had had a problem when she was younger, that she had seen these things. And apparently this uncle of theirs this guy she had married, he had seen them too, but he was like one of those people that was in denial about it. And he had all kinds of explanations about it, like people that have, there'll be a haunting or something, and one person will be like, well, I saw this, and another person's like, I just saw shadows. I don't know what that was. You know what I mean? So apparently, I guess from what I could deduce, that's what this guy was just a diehard. He wasn't gonna, and like I said, he drank and he hit her, so who knows what kind of person he was other than just a villain, I guess. So anyways, he told the guy, he's like, well, I ain't gonna do for you, and she's like, oh, come on, Hank, or whatever, whatever his name was, something like that. And she's like, just give him an escort out of here. So he got in his truck and followed him out, and they just thought that was crazy. So she told him, her husband, that they had stuff going on that property since she was a girl. Now, the one story that sticks out in the mind of Shane, what he told me was his Aunt Myrtle had told him that one day she was out chopping firewood with her brother being his grandfather. Now, he said that when she was out there chopping the firewood or whatever, that the brother just, I guess his grandfather, and this was a story that was relayed to him by his great aunt, that her brother, his grandfather, his name is Amos, grabbed her and said, let's go inside now. And she was like, why? What? And she said, don't look back, just let's go. He started pushing her and she's like, stop pushing me. She's getting upset. And he just yanks her and starts pulling her in. And she said this was back during the Depression, so I'm assuming like in the 30s. She looked back, she turned around, and just then her dog, their little dog, had run up and was confronting this creature, and it just opened its mouth. She said it had the biggest mouth that she had ever seen of any creature in any book, and it just reached down and grabbed the dog and just snapped, and all she heard was a crunching pop and a yelp, and then it was over. I guess the dog was covering their retreat, and it paid for it with its life. And he said that really had an effect on her. That when she told that story, she had tears in her eyes, and she's like, that's why I don't want you youngins out there after dark. And that's why we don't go out after dark. So that was a very telling story for him. Obviously, Shayna had an effect on him. But like I said, he only had the one encounter. He'd never seen these things. They're pretty elusive, and they were all pretty much in agreement that they're not around during certain times of the year. So I don't know if these things are seasonal. Maybe they hibernate during the summer. I'm trying to figure out that myself. But they said that most of the time, the encounters they had were in the fall, anytime in the late fall to early spring. And that's when they would see them. And throughout the winter, they would see them. So these things aren't hiding out in the winter. They're roaming around. And he said the cowboys that had worked for his grandfather when his spread got really big, the grandfather was the son of the guy that founded it, I guess, and that would be Shane's great-grandfather. And, of course, Abel, Noah, and Andrew, their father, he worked for the great-grandfather or whatever. So, anyways, I guess when he was a young man, he came to work for him. And I guess he was from Mexico originally, and he was a vaquero down in Mexico. So he took a job there, his first job he could get. And there were several other Mexicans that had come over because at that time they were telling me that there was something going on down there. There was some kind of war or something. So they all came up here to work, and they went to work for his great-grandfather. This stuff had been happening for a long time. And from what they were telling me, some of these vaqueros back in the day would see these things, roaming around the property, and they would take shots at them. And so I'm thinking they probably shot at them pretty regularly, and these things would just kind of run away because they knew what these things were capable of. So, that could have been either a learned trait that was passed down for these creatures to know what that gun was that Shane had. Because I thought that immediately when he said that they would take shots at him all the time, and that they had a bunkhouse. And now they told me that there was this old, it's run down now, but there was a bunkhouse where the vaqueros stayed at that was to the far west of the property. And that one night these things attacked the bunkhouse and that they were shooting at them. And they didn't go into detail. They didn't know a lot of details. They just heard this story passed down from the older generation. He also said that his grandfather at one time, he said that there was a big hole with like a tunnel that led down into the ground, kind of at an angle, and they covered it up. And he said that after they did that, it seemed like there was a spike in the activity, like a lot of sightings were taking place out there. And I'm sure that if I could ever talk to these older gentlemen, the uncles of these people, I could probably glean some really good information from them about this, but I don't have access to that, and I didn't ask. But anyway, those are the little side stories that I was told about this property and what had gone on there. And now the last encounter of this family, of the Hernandez family, was a brother. That's Jojo. Now, he's a real character. I like him. He's a good dude. I really like him a lot. He's funny. He was kind of the black sheep. He was the youngest of the four brothers. Abel, Noah, and Andre are his older brothers. Now, Jojo, he's kind of a joker, man. He likes to joke around. He's all tattooed up. Now, he did the stint in prison. He was in prison for a few years. He had gotten in trouble and did some time. So he liked to ride motorcycles. He didn't live out on the property. He moved and got married young and all this other stuff. But once he got out of the joint, in his words, he said, I cleaned up, I went back to God, and I went to work for my nephew, and I've been doing it ever since. Now, I've talked to him on several occasions, and I talked to him before I even knew that he was Jerry's uncle. So, anyway, he was working on the crew with Robbie over at the other property. So he was there that night. We were sitting there talking because we all kind of met that night, and I had bought them food. So I kind of was bribing them, tell me these stories. So anyway, we're sitting there and we're talking, and now this guy, Jojo, he goes, I have a story, but I don't want to talk about it. And I said, come on, man. And they all kind of started razzing him. They're like, oh, yeah, you're the guy that was going to knock it out and all this other stuff. And he's like, yeah, it happened. What happened, happened, and he didn't want to tell me. And I said, come on, man. Everybody else has told me their story. I want to hear your encounter. And he said, well, mine didn't happen on the ranch. He's like, and I nearly died. And I'm going like,
Well, it sounded like Robbie nearly died too. You know, it sounded like Shane nearly died. So what makes you different, you know? And he's like, yeah, but man, you know, mine was bad. You know, it was really bad, dude. And I was just like, well, everybody's is the worst because it happened to them. You know what I mean? So we're sitting here talking and he says, well, this happened to me at a property. Now I'm going to call this the Lowry place. Now these were people that lived in town and they decided they were going to build a house out in the country. Apparently this guy was somebody that they knew from school, that they had gone to school with. They all knew. They played football together. Anyway, we're going to call it the Lowry place. I'm not going to give you the last name because I don't know these people at all. This is secondhand from somebody else. So anyways, they were installing the cabinets for them. They had built a big old house right there about 5 miles out of town. And he said it was literally about 2 or 3 miles up the road from Shane's place. So it's close to the same area. You know, it's the same area. I doubt these things respect any boundaries. I'm sure that they probably roam around that whole region. I doubt that they're like, oh, this is somebody's property. I'm going to stay here. No, they move around. So it makes sense that this would happen. But anyways, he didn't believe any of the stories. He always thought it was just a bunch of mentiras, as he would say. So he said that, you know, I never bought into that. I always thought it was a bunch of bull crap. He goes, but I was working late one night and my partner, my carnal, he had left, you know, he was gone. And he said, I decided to stay late so I could try to finish up. I wanted to knock this job out. Plus, he said he wanted to do a good job. They were good friends. You know, they were friends of mine. I wanted to do a good job, you know. And so I'm staying back and I'm working late. He's like, I called my wife and I said, I'm going to be home late. I'm going to stay here and try to finish this job. Well, he said that it got to be his exact time frame was he said that it was close to midnight. So he had been there pretty late. And he said that he thought at one point, he thought he had seen something move towards one of the back windows earlier, right after dusk. But he's like, my eyes are playing tricks on me. But then he said around midnight, he said he clearly saw something move by one of the windows near the kitchen where he was working. And he said, oh no, at that point, he goes, I knew I saw something. And so this thing was lurking around, you know. And he said he turned the music off and he sat there for a minute just frozen like, what am I going to do? What the heck am I going to do? And he said all these thoughts were going through my mind like maybe this is what these people were talking about. And then he said maybe it's a Bigfoot. You know, he said it was obviously on 2 legs. So he didn't know what it was, but he knows he saw it. But he didn't get a good look at it because the lights were on the inside and it was pitch dark outside. So he says he walked to the front door and he locked it just because his instinct just to lock the door. And then he said just then he heard something walk up onto the step right there in front of the front door. And at this point, he's like, whoa, am I imagining this? Is this really happening? I know how that feeling is, having had my own encounter. You're thinking that at first, like, what is this? When he was telling me, it was the same thing when Robert was telling me his story. It was like, it was an emotional ride for him. You know what I mean? I could see it and everybody was quiet and we were listening. When everybody would tell their side of whatever happened, everybody was trying to be respectful. There wasn't anybody joking around and playing around, and that's what I'm saying. These guys always do that. They like to razz people. But they weren't joking. There was no chuckle house here. This guy was telling his story, and he said that something was at the door, and he looked out the peephole, and he goes, and I turned the porch light on. He's like, I didn't see anything. I just saw black. And he said that that's not correct, because with the porch light on, he should have been able to see his truck. He said his truck wasn't but like 10, 12 yards from the house where he was parked right there, you know. So anyways, he says he sees nothing but black, and he says then he hears something kind of sliding against the door. He said it sounded almost like cloth, you know, moving against the door. And he said that he was like, oh. So he backed up, and he looked at the peephole again, and he just sees blackness. And so at that point, he said he knew that something was there, and there was no doubt in his mind. He backed up, and he said he freaked out. And he said that this thing kind of bumped against the door again, and he heard a grunt. Then he said that at that point, he noticed the door to the garage was wide open, and the garage door was wide open. So he looks out. He doesn't see anything out in the driveway. So he closes the door, and he locks it for what good that was going to do him. So he says, I'm standing there, and I'm frozen. He goes, I don't know what to do. He goes, and I had a gun, but it was in the truck. He said, then he heard something in the garage, and he was like, oh, no, this thing is in the garage. And he's telling me this, and he's like, I don't know what to do, man. I'm frozen. I don't know what to do. And he said that, you know, it's going through his mind that he goes, what a fool that I was, you know, to believe
that I could deal with something like this. He's like, I was terrified, dude. I mean, he goes, I ain't gonna lie, I was terrified. And so he said he was standing there and he heard it sniffing around and growling, like a grunting, growling noise. And he said that it banged up against the door to the garage, like it went straight for the door. The doorknob kind of moved a little bit. He said it jiggled. Now I said, did it turn? Did it turn it, or did it kind of just jiggle it? And he said, because I've talked to people who had said that this thing, that they turned the doorknob, you know what I mean? And he said, no, it didn't turn, what I noticed, but I'm pretty sure it just kind of jiggled it. And he goes, but then again, I was so scared. So who knows? So anyways, he books out the front door. He just makes a split-second decision. He's going to bail. He's going to head for his truck because this thing bangs on the door again. And at this point, it was cracked. The door was cracking. So he ran out the front door. He said that he turned, and the garage was right there. He looked into the garage because he heard a loud bang, pop, crack. And the thing had, I guess, it had gotten into the house. So he said that he pulled the emergency latch, I guess, for the garage door to pull it down, I don't know exactly how that works or whatever, but he said he pulled the garage door down just so if it tries to come back out, it would have to contend with the door. Maybe it couldn't open it and lift it the way, that we do. And I thought that's smart that he did that, Anyways, he made a break for his truck and he said, I didn't have one of those trucks with the boop boop. They just let you get in it. He's like, I had an old truck and I was trying to put the key in the hole. And he says, I literally was dropping my keys, dude. He goes, you would not believe. He goes, you see that happen in these movies. The way he says it is really funny. He's like, you see these pendejos doing it in the movies and you're like, why are you doing that, pendejo? And then he said that it was happening to him and he was just like so scared and so nervous. He said he finally got in, he got the truck, he got in and he was like, my pistol's right here. He reaches down, he grabs it and he's like, this thing comes running out after me. I'm going to shoot it. I got my gun right here, And he says that he's like sitting there thinking, maybe I should call the police because he didn't, when he was inside the house, he had told me that he had no bars. And he told me that at the beginning of the story. He goes, because I asked him, I said, do you have a cell phone? He said, no, it didn't have any signal out there. He goes, it didn't have any bars. And he's like, dude, he goes, I was mad. He's like, and I'm thinking, I'm immediately starting to drive down the road and I'm looking back and I'm, I was going to look for my phone. And I realized I left it in the house. So when I could get a signal, I left it on the counter or whatever. And, so he was freaked out. He looks back. Now, this is what he told me. Well, this part sounds kind of incredible, but this is what I was told. He looked back and that this thing was looking out the glass panel of the garage door. And he said, and I asked him, I said, what did it look like? He said it looked like a big old bear with a wolf's head. That's all I could describe, like a bear-wolf mix. And I said, what color was it? He said it was black. He said it was black, jet black, like just black as night. Just solid black. And I said, and I asked him, I said, are you sure it was just solid? He goes, no, it was just solid black. He says he hears a crash. He looks back. And this thing is reaching through the panel with its hand kind of moving around down below the, like reaching down. You could see the arm coming out of the window. That was really interesting to me. So I asked him, I said, what did it look like? What did the arm look like? And he said it was just black, covered with hair, just like the face, and he said, but it had this weird looking paw hands. Now, I asked him to describe that. He said, I didn't look back a second time. He goes, I was gone. And he's like, and I got my gun right there in my hand and I'm driving down the road all crazy, and he's like, he's thinking, if this thing comes running alongside his truck, he's going to shoot it, he's going to start firing at it, and he just kept thinking that's what was going to happen. So he's hauling, he gets to this convenience store, I guess, right down the road, a few miles, whatever. He stops. He says, I had to just sit there in the parking lot and process what had just happened. And he's like, he goes, I literally broke down in tears. He goes, I couldn't believe what had just happened to me. He goes, I thought there's no way that just happened to me. He goes, I just was stunned. He goes, I had always made fun of these people. And at that point, his nephews were kind of laughing at him and Shane was laughing at him. And he was like, I'm sorry. And I thought he was kind of tearing up at the time, but he's kind of a big guy. He's like, I'm like a machismo, And so I was thinking, he's not going to start crying right now. But he didn't. He held his composure and he was like, I was wrong. These things exist. I can't believe what I saw. And he goes, but I'm telling you, he looked me in my eye and he said, Wolf, I'm telling you the absolute truth. There is no lie right here. I'm telling you what I saw. That is what happened to me. And then, I looked at everybody. They were kind of nodding their head, and I was like, okay. I mean, you say that's what happened, He said, anyways, he goes, I get home, and I'm telling my wife about it. I'm frantically telling her about it. He goes, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know, he said, I told my wife, and she was just like in shock. She was like, she had heard the stories too from my family. Neither one of us really believed it, but he goes, I told her, I said, babe, look, this is real. This, I'm not kidding. He's like, luckily I had the pistol with me in the truck. So if that thing came out, I was going to start shooting it. And he said that she was like, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you. She's like, the other day when I had the kids with me, I unloaded your gun. And I put the bullets in the glove compartment, and he was like, what? And he was so frantic that he didn't even notice that there was no ammunition in the gun. So that peace of mind that he had by getting in the vehicle and thinking he had a pistol, which might not have done any good anyway. But I guess if you're driving and you're taking pot shots at it, maybe it would slow it down. I don't know. But there wasn't even any bullets in the gun. And he was just like, he goes, dude, I almost fainted. I was just like, man. And then he's like, at first, he goes, I don't think she believed what I was telling her. He goes, because she said, let's go get your phone. And he's like, no, we're not going back. Do not go there. We're not going back to that place. So he said the next day, the Lowrys came in and they were like, what the hell happened? He had left them a message, told them to give him a call. And they went back to take a look at the damage that this thing had done. And he said that he didn't know if these people really believed him, but that he didn't give a shit at that point. He was like, I don't care. And he said, I didn't give a, he goes, I wasn't going back to that place. He's like, and when we went, he goes, I went back, but I stayed out in the truck. I didn't even get out. And he said that my brother and my nephew, and they went in, they talked to him. Now, this is what Jerry told me. Now he told me, that's the nephew. He told me that he saw the damage this thing did. The garage door was bowed out and just literally like broken in half. Now, if you can just, I don't know how that would look. I tried to wrap my mind around that and wondered, like, how does a garage bent at a V, like, the way he said, and which to me would be like, at an angle, a 90-degree angle, I guess. I don't know. He said that it was bowed out and snapped. That the door from the garage going into the dining room or whatever, the entry room, I said dining room because I don't know exactly. I'm trying to make, my mind. He said that the door going into that entry room, that the door was cracked in the middle and broken off the hinges, and that the paneling was busted out. The initial reaction from the Lowrys was like, this dude got high on some paint or something, and he must have did this. But how did he do this? And so, obviously, he didn't do it. That was the linchpin. But what sold them on his story was the fact that there was a huge gash. Now, I told you about this, Vic. There was a huge gash running along the little hallway when you first walk in. Javier said when you first walk in, the hallway is right there in the garage. That wall on the other side of the drywall is the garage. He said there was a huge 2-inch gash. They were cutting through the drywall. And that this thing had run its claws along that, apparently. And they didn't know how to explain that. And they were just like, what the hell? And then they said that there was a puddle of piss in the kitchen, and it just smelled horrible. Now that, I don't know what that was all about, why it does these things it does, or why it did that. I have no freaking clue. I mean, all I know is what they told me. This is what happened. This is what they say happened. So that's those stories from the Hernandez family, and that's the stories from Shane's family.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. Thanks as always so much for listening. Have a great night. If you've had a dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you.